Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. All modern hospitals have one thing in common. Life there has a special rhythm. Although the interiors are sterile, the environment changes every second of the day and night. From the outside, this heavy traffic may seem akin to Brennan's, but at a closer look, even a person far from medicine will realize how calibrated the algorithm of hospital life. Stephen felt like a fish out of water when he first arrived at the hospital. He had given more than 20 years to his favorite profession and knew perfectly well how this complex mechanism called a multidisciplinary clinic worked. And he was very proud of the fact that he was one of the cogs of this system. The doctor also liked to philosophize about his purpose in this troubled world. In the circle of colleagues, the man liked to repeat our mission to meet a new life. And that's fine. When you hold a little person in your arms, you feel like God, if not God, then his special representative on earth. It's a unique feeling. That morning, Stephen was also thinking about it, because he was about to perform a major operation to save another little life. He was already heading towards the opera block, as a dimensional figure of an older nurse, Camille Hold, suddenly appeared on his way. "We'll have to postpone the operation for a while. Were you required by the chief to take such liberties with a junior in rank?" Could well be construed as a breach of medical ethics. But in a Lifeline clinic, in exceptional cases, it was allowed. All the more so for Camille, the oldest woman on the ward. She regarded everyone as her children, and she talked to the whole staff in that way. The most interesting thing is that doctors and nurses saw this good-natured woman as a second mother. Many shared secrets with her, and some even cried on her shoulder, and the head nurse found the right words for everyone. Noticing that the doctor hesitated, Camille repeated the address, but a tone louder. "But why are you frozen? Run to the chief on the carpet. He has something urgent to do with you. I told him we have women on the operating table. The situation is critical. And he wants Kazansky to see me. Don't worry about it. I've already warned Brown." That news has calmed the doctor down a bit. She hasn't left yet. "Thank you. You're our lifesaver. Only instead of a fairy costume, I'm wearing a sterile gown that repels not only bacteria, but also cute elves." The woman made an expressive gesture with her hand and continued along the usual route. Stephen hurried to the elevator. The office of the chief was a floor above. There was a small queue in the reception area, and the receptionist looked at the newcomer with undisguised displeasure. She immediately pressed the selector button. "Christopher is here." "Good, I understand you." The sour expression was instantly replaced by a duty smile. "Is the chief expecting you? Come on in." Stephen had time to think that this nice girl should work in the theater, not in a medical institution. Only good actors can change their faces that fast. Christopher was talking to someone on the phone. He nodded the visitor to a chair and continued talking. "Don't worry, Rick, everything will be fine. But even a good doctor can't account for all the pitfalls. I'm not making excuses." "You got that right." Stephen realized the supervisor was talking to the supervisor and forgot to make sense. The man put the receiver on the machine. Then with a handkerchief he brushed the sweat off his forehead. "Here you, staffers, do not even suspect what labor is not worth defending you. But the most interesting thing is that you don't even appreciate it. You think I'm a hardened bureaucrat." For a minute there, Stephen felt sorry for him. Not a bad man, in principle, with whom he had more than just an official relationship. After all, Christopher was the father of his wife. That is, in the circle of the closest relatives. But at work it was not supposed to remember about it. So the doctor limited himself to the standard form of sympathy. "Christopher, we appreciate and respect you. But I'd like to know why you called me in on such short notice." "I have a patient in surgery." The chief grimaced. "I understand your outrage, but I ordered Brown to replace you. She can handle it. I have no doubt that Emily can handle it. But the man's been off duty 24 hours. It's no big deal. It's not the first time she's been married. It's what we do. You take it easy. Do you need your help? I can't get anyone else to do it because you're the only one with a good mouth. I don't get it. Explain more. The chief waved his hand dismissively. You see, I'm also under pressure from above. I got a call from the region. They want an interview for television. And you know what my relationship with these sharks of the pen is like, don't you? But Christopher canceled the operation for the sake of talking to journalists. Yes, some tests. First of all, nobody canceled anything. And secondly, for the sake of the image of the institution, you can sacrifice something. I mean, it's all about PR. What did you think? Market conditions demand that without this, as you say, PR, we will remain in the backyard. You think I'm comfortable with that? I'm a doctor, and I'm supposed to be doing this kind of crap. Christopher was really going at it. It was obvious that he had a lot on his mind, too. And Stephen once again felt a pang of pity for this not young man. All right, I'll give the Dan interview when the reporter shows up. You're glad he's here. He's already here, waiting for you and your resident. But it's a girl, and she's quite pretty. Just make sure you don't get too comfortable. Stephen stared at the chief in bewilderment. Are you saying there's an unauthorized person in my ward at this moment? I know it's a breach of regulations, but the press representative asked me very much, begged me to let her experience the working atmosphere of the maternity ward. But we can make an exception. No, Christopher, you can't. I'll take questions, but she's not going to get past the sterile barrier. And I'm not going to disrupt the regimen because someone else wants to. We don't have enough hospital-acquired infections. I don't have the authority to order it. You're in charge. It's your call. Stephen felt his nerves clench into springs. He was already imagining how he was going to put this as yet unknown journalist in her place. With anger, the doctor's fists clenched automatically, so he had to catch his breath a little before entering the residence room. It turned out that a whole group of television employees were waiting for him. A cameraman was indifferently checking the equipment, and a skinny girl in a ridiculous blouse with huge flowers was writing something in a notebook. Another older woman with a neat suitcase sat on a sofa. Seeing this company, Stephen could hardly restrain himself from the harshest words. He called the nurse on duty. Why are they without gowns? What kind of vigilantism is this? The girl with the notebook. She answered for the nurse. Don't scold the nurse. It's not her fault. We've done away with the gowns. I have to be on camera all the time, and the cameraman is just uncomfortable in a gown. The doctor's cup of patience was overflowing, and he lashed out at the uninvited guests. Who are you to give orders around here? Do you realize that this is a maternity ward, and here is a special regime? Therefore, all outsiders are a danger to the lives of moms and babies. The girl barely reached the doctor's shoulder. She obviously did not expect such an outburst of anger on his part. She started stuttering out of fright. But I didn't know it was so serious. We just wanted to do a live shot. Don't even dream about it. And anyway, didn't they teach you in your office that before you go to the object, you should first study its features? Maiden nervously rubbed her wet blouse with thin fingers, and her voice trembled with excitement. Yes, I've been warned. But I didn't think it was that serious. I need to get the material done soon. It's a miracle. You see, she has an emergency. The girl is a special needs institution, while Stephen brought the inexperienced journalist up to speed. A nurse brought gowns for the entire creative team. The woman, the valise, and the cameraman quickly paid for themselves in white robes. The girl followed their example as well. But from confusion, her hands were shaking badly, and she could not get into the sleeves of the protective clothing in any way. The doctor felt embarrassed for his not too friendly attitude towards the TV crew. He decided to help the girl who was ready to cry. She gratefully accepted the help. Thank you, Stephen. You see, this is the first time I've been assigned to do serious reporting. I just wanted it to be at the highest level. I know exactly what you mean. I was young and inexperienced myself. No offense, but I want to give you some useful advice. As you call the girl by her first name, she became Evelyn. You mean Evelyn. That's very nice. So, Evelyn, I advise you in the future to specify everything to the details, even before you start work. I don't know who you agreed with, but I had to transfer my patient to another doctor because of your unexpected visit, and I can see that I'll have to cancel my plans for the whole day. That's the unfortunate story. The journalist Evelyn asked in a pathetic, childish way. I'm sorry, please, honestly. I didn't realize it was so serious. Stephen noticed that the other members of the group remained silent during the conversation. It didn't escape his gaze. What's on the face of the bag lady? A gloating expression froze only the cameraman, was still staring blankly out of the window. The doctor mentally concluded, wow, it seems that intrigue is rampant in the creative field too. Did these two best carp know exactly what they were up to? And deliberately set the girl up for a hit. But the doctor kept his thoughts to himself and said aloud a common phrase. Father Frost, translated from Latin, is the oldest language, which is still used in medicine. Cicero's phrase means what times are like today. So let's cut to the chase. The girl was pleased, smiled, gave signs of activity, and the operator. Only the lady with the briefcase remained in the same position. Evelyn reprimanded her. We're on it. Clean up my face. I was a little nervous. And the doctor had a forehead and cheekbones too. Don't push me. Girl, I can see perfectly well. I was struck by the lady's voice. He was thinking of asking if she was not voicing old lady Shapokliak or grandmother Yaga at the studio, but he held back in time. The person named Clara opened her casket and got down to business. I must say, she was very skillfully wielding all sorts of meters and brushes. Then the cameraman determined convenient places for shooting. The girl Evelyn asked the standard questions. Stephen was surprised to recognize that she worked very professionally. She never once looked into her notebook, but asked more questions as the conversation progressed. The competent actions of the young journalist bribed the doctor. But was there something else special about this girl that made his heart tingle? Evelyn, for obvious reasons, I can't take you to the delivery room, but we can visit the Happy Moms together. I'll just let the nurses know. By the way, feeding time is coming up, but we're strictly on the clock, so you can film some very touching scenes. Thank you. That's great. The girl jumped up on the spot with delight. Clara Modesto threw an unkind look in her direction. Stephen was sure that the Sorpus would snitch on the girl, but he did not speak out loud. The interview took almost 2:00. Saying goodbye to the guests, Stephen saw Brown walk tiredly out of the operating room. She waved hello to him. Everything is all right. The doctor did not hold back and reproachfully addressed the journalist. While we were talking to you, my colleague saved 2 lives at once. These are the heroes of our time. They are the ones you should be reporting on. After a minute, he regretted what he had said and did not take out his notebooks and began to quickly write something in it. Clara watched her with undisguised dislike. The cameraman and makeup artist hurried to the elevator. I didn't stay long. Stephen, I wanted to ask you something else, not for the interview. Go ahead. I'd be happy to answer your question, as long as it's not about my personal life. It's a little concerning. Tell me, did you immediately decide to become a doctor, or did you dream of another profession? No, this path was predetermined by fate itself. My mom spent almost 40 years in medicine, and I just couldn't choose another profession. One more question. Yes, where did you start practicing medicine? Well, usually after college, they send everyone away. That's what happened to me too. I had to work for 2 years, in a wonderful town with the romantic name of Kamishin. Evelyn jumped for joy again. What a coincidence. My relatives live in Kamishin. You're from there too. Stephen did not like that the girl was interested in such details. He evasively answered no. I only practiced there, but that was a long time ago. More than 20 years ago. To be honest, I've already forgotten what the town looks like. Stephen twisted his heart because he often recalled his early years in a small town in the countryside. It was the annoying journalist who had stirred up something in his soul that he had been hiding all these years. Stephen had always considered himself a capital city dweller, although his childhood and youth were spent in the Moscow suburbs. However, in Lyubertsy, all the guys considered themselves cool, and there were many reasons for this. But the main thing is that it was in this city that the Lyub band appeared. Therefore, all residents from preschoolers to old people were proud of their compatriotism with the popular collective. Stephen was also a fan of musicians, but at that time to get a ticket to a concert of Lyub was unrealistic. For two reasons, the fabulous price and the limited number of tickets themselves. But the most difficult thing was finances. In the family, apart from Stephen, there were two younger brothers. And the only breadwinner was the mother. Jenna worked as a midwife, and to feed her boys, she was at the hospital 24 hours a day. But even working two jobs couldn't cover all the expenses. At first, the father sent child support, and then he disappeared without a trace. One day, Stephen found a letter with a strange stamp in the drawer of his dresser. And reading it, he realized that his father is in places very remote. He never told anyone about this fact from his biography. And then, when he received a passport, he took his mother's maiden name. But Jenna, despite the workload, knew perfectly well about the hobbies of her sons because she tried to be aware of the affairs of each. One day, she suggested to the eldest, "Stephen, to us temporarily to work in the emergency room is required in the nursing department. You only have to work 2 night shifts a week. If you want, I can arrange to take you on weekends. You can earn some money for your pocket money." The young man agreed right away. After a month, he was so absorbed in his work that he decided to become a doctor, even though his first salary was small. He was able to buy a ticket to see his favorite band. There was still money left over for candy for his younger brothers and flowers for his mom. Jenna, from the excess of feelings, even wept. "Edichka, I haven't even noticed how you've grown up. You're already earning your own money." Encouraged by his first success, the boy assured his mother that this was just the beginning. "Mom, I will definitely become a doctor and will get good money." The woman cried even more. "Son, to get into the institute, you need to have a BLAT or a certificate with only A's. And you have neither. And there's no one to help us. Our family is all poor. Stephen, hug. Don't cry. And believe me, I'll get in. There must be a dynasty of Kazan doctors." Jenna laughed. "I'm not a doctor, midwife. I mean, it's the middle tier. And why are you talking about Kazans? It was my last name before I got married. Mom, I decided to take your last name. Here's the passport." The woman looked at the document and couldn't find words. "Son, but it's not allowed. According to the law, children must take their father's name." "Mom, you're wrong. A child has the right to choose any surname of his parents. I've decided I'm going to be a Kazan dynasty." "Sounds great. Didn't you say my grandfather was in medicine?" "Yes, he was a paramedic, and Mom was a professor at the pharmacy. So you see, it's a dynasty. Don't worry about getting in. There's still time for me to do better in my studies." Stephen didn't have a problem with his studies. He was considered one of the best students in the school. But still, he couldn't get a red certificate. He spent the rest of the year studying hard. And as a result, he received a document with only 1 B. Teachers were amazed at the boy's ambition. What a good boy. Too bad he got a B in math. Well, Stephen was not upset about it. He was sure that he would definitely get in at the first attempt. Probably, it was this confidence that gave him strength during the entrance exams. When he saw his name on the list of students, his excitement eased. But the purposeful young man also did not allow new results. All the years of student life, the guy also devoted to study. He did not go to discos and did not even meet with girls, although they were very actively trying to win his favor. When the guys joked about this, he cheerfully replied, "Finish the institute to make up for lost time. I will have a temporary harem, and a whole week will devote to a body life. In the meantime, you have to sacrifice something for a bright future, to make it easier on Mom." Stephen was working part-time at the clinic as an orderly. His past experience helped him a lot. His older coworkers used to tease him all the time. "Student, where did you learn all this stuff? You can already be trusted with a scalpel." Of course, the praise was pleasant to the guy, but he never turned up his nose. In his third year, he decided to choose ecology. Fellow students, they made fun of him. Stephen is not a man's business, but the guy was convinced that gender does not affect the choice of specialization. After all, for the sick doctor is a helper and savior, and whether he is a man or a woman does not matter. Stephen was sure that he would get on distribution in one of the capital's hospitals, but admitted that in the worst-case scenario, he would have to work for a couple of years in a polyclinic. But the promising student did not expect that he would be sent into exile in the unfamiliar city of Kamyshin. When he learned about his unenviable fate, he almost cried. The most surprising thing is that he was the outsider, because other guys from the course, who skipped lectures and passed the state exams worse than him, were luckier. His fellow students openly laughed at him. John Williams, whose dad ran the clinic, made fun of him. But what? You don't always get the lucky ticket. Sometimes you don't. You've been listening to your brain for years, and you have to go to the woodshed. But don't despair. People live in the provinces too. There's even a club with dancing to the accordion and a bathhouse with a store. How will you settle down? Let me know. Stephen couldn't stand those arrogant guys. Often they almost got into fights, and John was always the provocateur. Fellow students tried not to hurt him, were afraid of the high position of Father Williams. Stephen, too, for many 6 years restrained himself. But having received hard labor assignments, he forgot about conventionality. Celebrating victory early. You don't know where you'll be a year from now. You're as dumb as a jackass, only thanks to your daddy. But it's dangerous to let you near the sick, because your name is Dr. Death. Witnesses to this verbal altercation held their stomachs. Well done. You got Williams on 5. That's an interesting nickname for him. With Stephen's hand, the nickname Dr. Death has indeed been firmly planted on John. So you could say he was taking revenge on his enemies. He considered for himself humiliating the prospect of working 2 years in the province. For 2 days, the boy was not himself. He could not dare to tell his mother that he would have to go to Mutarakan. But it was impossible to hide anything from Jenna. "Son, you're walking around like you're in the water. Have you already had your assignment?" Stephen lowered his head. Mom had. "So, nothing good. I was sent to the glorious city of Kamyshin." Stephen expected anything: tears, righteous, maternal anger, words, sympathy. But Jenna's reaction struck him dead. The mother glowed with happiness. "That's good, son. The conventional wisdom is that working in the provinces is humiliating, and the most mediocre medical graduates are sent there. But as life shows, it is in rural areas and small towns is the best place to start practicing. After all, a young specialist immediately gets to the front line. He will have to take responsibility and make decisions himself. And for a doctor, it is the most important thing." The city with a picturesque name met the young doctor as not welcoming, like a bucket of rain was pouring. So there were puddles everywhere, more resembling lakes, until Stephen reached the local hospital. He was washed up to nothing. But the personal loss was insignificant compared to what lay ahead of him. The hospital building looked bleak and even scary. The interior also left an unpleasant impression of linoleum floors, iron beds with netting, and broken furniture. A frightened middle-aged woman reported to an elderly paramedic who volunteered to be his guide for a while. "Sam, I was left here on duty. Where did they all go?" The woman's eyes widened. "Sam, are you asking stupid questions? People are digging potatoes. It's raining like a bucket. Now the sky is cracked. But this morning it was fine." The woman looked at Sam as if she was seeing him for the first time. The man felt uncomfortable in front of the young specialist and tried to justify the actions of his colleagues. "Do not think, Stephen. We have a good, very friendly team." "Yes, that's what I noticed. Friendly. Tell me, Sam, what if there's an emergency?" "Well, God forbid, of course, bleeding or even a hypertensive crisis. What will the guard do then?" The paramedic blushed. Then the cough is gone. We have developed a special algorithm. If something happens, calls the doctor on duty. Wow, you even have a doctor. Good thing I won't be here alone. The paramedic proudly pointed out that we have 7 doctors on our staff, but only half of them are employed. Do not think. We are not some backward hospital of Ceres times, but quite a modern institution. Only our funding is poor. But that's for now. Wendy decided to support her colleague. Don't be afraid, dear man. We have good people working for us. And when we need to cover up, I always hand them all over. Who are you? Stephen thought Wendy was a nurse and asked her a question just to be on the safe side. But what was his surprise when the woman shook her head proudly. Kudryashov replied, "And I'm a junior physician's assistant." Stephen felt his lower jaw slowly dropping. He looked at the embarrassed Sam. "Oh, you guys. So, everyone's off to the potato patch," and left the orderlies on the lookout. Wendy, but it offended the new doctor. "Am I not a human being? Maybe I know more than you do. I've been in a lot of binds. I can take a plaster cast and give a shot if they ask me to. What else can we do? How many doctors have been in our hospital?" Tell Sam. But many were young and eager, but none stayed long. Wendy decided to put an end to the argument. "And I don't know what to call you. You'll find it in a year or two, too. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna clean up before dinner's served." The tour of the hospital ended with a visit to the food block. Sam was visibly animated and praised the cooks at every turn. "Girls, we have such masters that as in a fairy tale they make soup from an axe. Valuable personnel. And you, remember, what is your duty to take a sample?" Food. The unit was on the fringe in the furthest corner of the hospital grounds. At first, Stephen thought it was a garage or a warehouse, but when he realized it was a moss-covered building where food was prepared, he couldn't help himself. "Tell me, dear Sams, did they happen to make war movies in this set?" Hospital. The tour guide took offense. "Why don't you like it? We have a normal hospital. Thanks for that. In the neighboring district, the building has completely collapsed. Now they take their sick and laboring women to us. Even so, I didn't think there could be anything worse than this pathetic spectacle." Sam the paramedic took even more offense. "Yes. Do you know what kind of people worked here? Real surgeons, top-notch. They did surgeries that you can't get in a hospital in the capital. If you like it here, you can get out of here. We're not keeping anyone." Stephen realized that he had offended an elderly paramedic who had worked in this hospital all of his life. He apologized to him for a long time. And then he took the keys to the service apartment and went to the wooden building where Sam pointed to the glorious town of Kamyshin. He was preparing new surprises for the young doctor. The wooden structure turned out to be a dormitory family-type room in which Stephen was to live. Also caused complete disappointment. The only thing that pleased him was hot water and a bathroom. Before he could look around, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." The young man expected to see anyone but a pretty girl. "Hello. Congratulations on moving in. I'm your neighbor, Vanessa." The girl confidently extended her hand. Stephen was confused for a moment. "And I'm Stephen." That is, Stephen had just arrived today to serve at the local medical center. I have to admit, I still can't get over the shock. It's not surprising. I was in the same state for a while. But I got used to it. I'm thankful they gave me a place to live, or I'd have had to wander around in dark apartments. We're not coworkers by any chance, are we? I've only been working here a couple months. I was assigned to this dump right out of college. You won't believe it, but I sat there for a week. I even had bad thoughts. Vanessa laughed. It's a joke in this nice town. Only black thoughts come into your head. Of course, one gets used to everything. But I'm not going to stay here for long. I'll work my ass off and look for a better place. The whole evening the unhappy neighbors spent together. Vanessa fed the newly arrived doctor a delicious borscht, since it was the first time they had met. They decided to cement their acquaintance with a bottle of champagne. In the evening, Vanessa suggested that maybe we could go for a little walk before going to bed. I have to go on duty tomorrow morning, and I can't get used to the new place. I'm not sleeping well. As a Dutch gentleman should, Stephen volunteered to escort the girl. The weather was fine, and only huge puddles reminded of the recent rain. The streets were quiet and deserted. Only rare couples in the arms of passers-by were walking along the park path. Stephen felt cozy in the company of this girl. Vanessa, do you happen to have a feeling that we have met before? A little bit, but scientists attribute this phenomenon to the same psychotype of people. Vanessa, how you've just ruthlessly cut short my fantasies. I was already immersed in romantic reveries. I'm a realist, even a pragmatist. Do you remember the catchphrase about living life without pain? Well, yes, so that it doesn't hurt and resent wasted time. That's why I already have everything scheduled for several years ahead from the drum. I'll find a good job in the city. Perhaps I'll study further. Get married when all girls dream of getting married. Vanessa laughed. I also have this point in mind. But I won't marry the first man I meet. Excuse me for an indiscreet question, but what candidates will be considered? Only prospective ones. It may sound rude, but I don't need a simple man who works at a machine or drives for a meager salary. I see. Do you dream, as many girls do, of marrying rich men? I think they call them oligarchs nowadays. No, I'm not looking for a purse on legs, but financial stability never hurts. And the main thing, I dream to meet an established man, so that he had a good job, his own place, and other basics. And you will not be bored. Why, following your example, Vanessa, I will also refer to psychologists. So they say that when a person lives in full prosperity, he becomes wildly bored. I won't be bored. They walked until almost midnight. When they were walking back to the dormitory, Stephen noticed the silhouette of a man. Vanessa said grudgingly, "There goes that Robert again." Stephen grinned at the groomer. Kind of like that one. I don't know where to hide from him. The guy noticed the approaching couple and immediately boiled. Vanessa, who the fuck is this guy? Robert, what kind of language is that? It's not a Dutch. Our new doctor came from Moscow. So you're happy with the capital's cockhole, and you don't care about Robert. Vanessa wanted to say something, but Stephen beat her to it. He was much stronger and taller than Robert, and he deftly lifted him off the ground. Look, young man, if I hear one more rude word about my neighbor and my colleague. The kid got away with what? It was nothing. I'll give you a nail enema. Vanessa burst out laughing, and Robert flapped his eyes in confusion. What do you mean with nails? Are there such enemas? They do, but they're done for prophylactic purposes. Robert left the scene of the fight, but he came right back. Hey doc, that's my girl. I see you around her again. You're on your own. And I don't give a damn about your medical stuff like enemas and nails. It was a night Stephen would remember for the rest of his life. For Vanessa, it was also a landmark. Now, after her shift, she was in a hurry to get home, and in the evening she waited for her neighbor to return from work. Unhappy Robert was suffering from unrequited love alone on a bench near the dormitory. Stephen felt sorry for the guy, and he once said to Vanessa, "Are you sure that everything in your life will go according to the pre-scheduled plan? Don't you think that one day will come, you're gonna regret ever turning that guy down? That could happen. But I don't see that man around me. You're wrong. At first I thought this Robert was a hapless kid too, but it turns out he's a real hero." What do you mean? I mean he risked his life to save a fellow worker. They had an accident in the shop, and a man was almost crushed by a stove. And Robert reacted, got hurt himself, and saved his comrade from imminent death. The girl looked at Stephen with surprise. Where did you get this information? From our hospital, I guess. Your Robert was brought in while I was on duty. You know that every doctor in our hospital is a handyman. I had to take over as surgeon yesterday, so I treated Robert for a while. Anyway, I put him in the ward. Maybe you'd like to visit him. Let the kid enjoy himself. Neighbors didn't see each other for a long time because their work schedules didn't match. It was only 3 weeks later that Stephen came face to face with Vanessa in the kitchen. The girl was excited to see him. "Listen, we live in the same apartment, but we don't see each other for weeks. For friendship's sake, you'd take me to your ward. I heard you guys are having maternity leave." Yeah. But you know, Vanessa, it's just a matter of not having a full complement of staff. For example, I've learned almost every related specialty in a few months. Can you fill in for a midwife? Oh, I'm probably not right for it. I can navigate an operating room with my eyes closed. Delivering a baby is a big responsibility. It's always like that when you start poaching staff. It's a bummer. I'm also in favor of getting out of here as soon as possible. I don't know yet. Vanessa, have you changed your plans? The girl was embarrassed on her face. A bright blush appeared. I have some, by the way, thanks to you. I'm not going to guess yet, but maybe I'll invite you to the wedding soon. That's interesting. Who's the lucky guy? Rude Robert. Stephen slyly looked at her, but could not stand it and laughed. Vanessa looked so embarrassed. You hit the spot. But he's really not a bad guy, and his parents are really nice. By the way, Robert's mom is a teacher, and he's so rude. That's skewed. That's what your favorite psychologists explain. They think it's because of childhood complexes, but I'm very happy for you. Just hurry up with the wedding, or I'll be gone. A man promised to pull me out of this swamp called Kamishin, and as you know, that's what I want more than anything. Stephen did not lie to the neighbor. The prospect of returning to the capital really existed. For several months, the young doctor worked without weekends, and when a lot of heads accumulated, he decided to visit his mother in the electric train. He ran into John Williams quite by accident. He was delighted to see you. What are you doing here? Honestly, I'm very happy to see you, and I repent for treating you unfairly. You know, even a year can make a man wise. Tell me, how are you doing in your John in Kamishin? You don't even realize what a shithole it is, but when you don't have the basic things you need to work, you want to cry. I have the feeling that no one in that godforsaken place has ever heard of modern medicine. Yes, this is the situation everywhere. Of course, in the capital it's a little easier, but we have to beat out even ordinary bandages. My father comes every day from work as a psychologist. He's in charge now, but you can be patient for such a position. What about your sister? I dated her for a while when I was young. And then the girl found a more affluent beau for herself. John scratched the back of his head. Jack, as usual, waiting for her prince. She had a fiancé who looked like a prince. He was, but he went to the States. Her sister suffered for a long time because he didn't take her with him. Now she's looking again. By the way, can you try to rekindle the relationship? I'm sorry, John, but you can't step in the same river twice. I think you'll agree with me on that one. I couldn't agree with you more. And my sister's no picnic. Personally, I'd run 10 kilometers without looking back. I don't envy anyone who has to live under the same roof with her. They chatted for a while, recalled some student life jokes. And John gave him a booby-trapped square. It's my business card. Now all decent guys have one. It's got all the coordinates. I hope you got a grave. No, I've only seen a picture of one. And my salary can't buy such an expensive thing. Don't be pompous. They say they pay doctors well in the countryside. That's just a rumor. But in reality, it's a pittance. A doctor's rate is more or less the same. Nurses and orderlies. My neighbor is an operating room nurse. She can work with her eyes closed. Maybe she's afraid to get paid. John pushed Stephen. Nice neighbor. She's all right. Only she's getting married soon. Too bad. I would have come to visit. Vanessa went about the apartment like a butterfly. Stephen watched her cooking with a smile. On the one hand, he was happy for his neighbor and irrepressible Robert, but at the thought that Vanessa was getting married, he felt sad. So he carefully avoided meeting with the girl one-on-one. For a while he succeeded, But one evening, Vanessa herself knocked at the door of his room. "Stephen, don't you think we need to have a serious talk?" The young man was silent. He was afraid and waiting for this conversation. He was afraid because he could not understand his feelings. "Why don't you say anything? You do realize that sometimes one word, one move can solve everything." "I don't want to make a fatal mistake." "I don't want that either." Suddenly, Vanessa started to cry. She spoke loudly and desperately. "But why? Why do you bear all this in silence? Why do you let me go out with this Robert? He is kind and very good, but I don't love him. You see, I dream about you every night. You have no idea how many times I've stood breathlessly at your door, afraid you'd chase me away." The flow of reproaches was interrupted by a long kiss. The lovers lost track of time. They forgot about everything in the world and hugged each other and fell asleep only in the morning. Vanessa was the first to jump up. "I think I overslept," Stephen said. "I'm on duty too." Vanessa admired his pumped-up torso. "Oh, what's that?" "It's a birthmark on all the men. My grandfather had a big one. My younger brothers also have one." Vanessa's eyes are on fire again. "Let's call the hospital and say we've caught the plague and we're quarantined." "No, I don't want the plague. Let's just keep it simple." "All right, fine. Then it's chicken pox and dysentery or rubella." "Vanessa, stop scaring me with scary infections or I'll run away from you." "You won't. I'll find you by your birthmark and I'll get you out of the ground." In a burst of happiness, the couple completely forgot about Robert. Only on the doorstep of the apartment, Vanessa remembered her fiancé and said firmly, "There will be no wedding." "Stephen, I'm right." The man was confused. "I don't know yet. Everything happened so spontaneously. I must have misspoken. There will be a wedding, but not with Robert. I mean, we're together now and forever." To avoid answering the question, Stephen kissed his beloved. And at night, when he was returning from duty, near the entrance, someone came at him from behind and knocked him to the ground. From his breathing and the blows that were coming at him from different directions, the doctor realized that at least 3 people were torturing him. Before he lost consciousness, he heard Vanessa screaming, "What are you assholes doing? Leave him alone." After that, Stephen fell into a void where it was very dark. The whole battered body was pierced with pain. The first thing Stephen woke up to was Vanessa's crying face. "Honey, I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Then came the face of the district attorney. "The doctors did a great job on you. You can talk. Who attacked you? We'll draw up a report." Stephen tried to speak, but he was immediately pierced by pain. He whispered quietly, "There's no need for a report. I treated myself while I was being treated." "Precinct officers." The doctor was indignant. "Do you realize that by your refusal you are encouraging criminals? I will not write and sign anything. Everything happened by accident." The policemen left with nothing. Vanessa stayed at the doctor's bedside for days. She spoon-fed him, tried to support him in every possible way. But the most important thing the man learned from her was that the girl canceled the wedding. "We're getting married now." But the doctor was silent. The girl thought that it was just hard for him to talk. Then she asked him the question several times, but he always answered evasively. "Of course, Vanessa, you and I will marry, but we must wait a little longer. I'm not quite strong enough yet. Why would you want such a useless husband? I'll faint at the most important moment." Vanessa understood the joke and waited for her lover to decide on an important step. But days went by and nothing changed. Stephen understood perfectly well that it could not go on like this. One day, when Vanessa was at work, he found John's business card and called his home phone. Tho answered right away. "It's a good thing you called. As they say, the catcher flees the beast. I was about to put out a BOLO. There's an opening at my dad's clinic. Listen, thanks. I didn't expect that. But how? I've got a settlement to make. I've got some errands to run. If you don't show up tomorrow morning, there's another candidate. There's a lot of applicants for this position. As long as you're a resident, you could be chief. So doesn't it matter? Stephen rushed to the hospital. He applied for the settlement, explaining the urgency with his mother's illness. He was embarrassed to lie, but there was no other way out. Returning to his bachelor's den, he also hastily began to pack his things, hoping that he would be able to escape before Vanessa returned. But she had returned from work early. Seeing the packed suitcases, the girl realized everything. "Stephen, what happened? Have you thought about what's going to happen to me? I mean, everyone's gonna be pointing fingers at me." Vanessa was not crying, but there was so much despair and longing in her voice that the man felt uncomfortable. He tried to hug her, and she snuggled into his shoulder. "You promised to get married. You're running around on your own." He stroked her back like a baby. "Vanessa, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I can't take you with me just yet. I have no one in the capital. I'll have to find an apartment. And then, what if I'm not a worthy candidate for you?" He lowered his eyes for a few minutes. There was silence in the room. Then the young doctor resolutely took up his suitcases. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." He jogged down from the second floor. With the same accelerated step, he reached the train station. Only in the train carriage did he catch his breath. The man felt his face burning with fire, and his heart was torn by remorse. The train was taking him away to a new life, and the wheels backed up all the way. "You're a scoundrel. You're a scoundrel." It wasn't until years later that he realized that day was the black day of his shame. But Stephen constantly chased away the intrusive thoughts of going back and finding Vanessa. He tried to forget the girl who had believed him, but fate had a vengeance on him for that deed. The TV was on again, and Stephen sat motionless, staring at the plasma screen. "Stephen, you're all right." He snapped his fingers near his nose. The man roughly withdrew his wife's hand. "What kind of stupid behavior is this? I'm not a rabbit to test my reflexes on. Something's starting to kick in at half speed. Because I want to rest. You torment me with your endless questions, Stephen. But that's understandable. I'm not a stranger. I'm your lawfully wedded wife." The woman froze for a moment. "Look, maybe you have someone else." And I missed the point. Stephen stood up and walked past his wife, but she followed him. "And I'm waiting for an answer. Jean, you only have one thing on your mind. I remember you weren't interested in me before. Why the sudden change? You know, I got bored. My daughter grew up. My dog got stolen from me. So it's just you." The man was pouring tea at the time. "You're doing great, so I was lower on your priority list than your dog," Zhana Kristanovna remarked defiantly, "but you claim to be more than that." The woman poured tea too and sat down on the soft couch. "More than that. It's not your stubbornness that amazes me, but how people quickly become ungrateful. Do I owe you anything? Of course you do. My father and brother had a part in your fate. If it weren't for them, you'd still be in Kamyshin, and you'd be married to some Tolstoy of a collective farmer. Zhana, for your information, collective farms were abolished a long time ago. Kamyshin must have changed too. And about my marriage, you've made up your own mind. Nobody dragged you to the registry office. You're talking like that. You're ahead of yourself. So, what a modest young man you were when you wanted a better position. Stop it. You had nothing to do with this. Christopher helped me. And in return, I married you. Otherwise, Kavala would still be sitting on old cases. So as not to further inflame an already heated atmosphere, Stephen threw on his cloak and closed the door of the country mansion behind him. Jean did not like the hustle and bustle of the city and preferred to spend the summer and fall in the elite village, although Stephen also liked the quiet life, but on the road. To work and back had to spend several hours every day. After a quarrel with his wife, he also decided to ventilate. Driven by some inner voice, he went to Paveletsky Station. In the train schedule, he found a familiar name and asked at the information desk, "How can I get to Kamyshin? There are direct flights." The girl looked at him strangely, as if he was asking not about provincial Russian cities, but about some island in the Pacific Ocean. Our schedule hasn't changed for years. That's why it's all accurate. The man realized that he was displeased with the woman on duty because he was bothering her. He didn't want to go home, so he wandered around the city until almost midnight. Jean did not even call. Anger at his wife had not yet passed, and he swore quite loudly. Well, and sit stupid not in four walls. Enjoy your loneliness. For the night, he rented a room in a hotel, where he slept well. And in the morning, forgetting about the scandal with his wife, he went to the clinic. No sooner had he gotten to the ward. Camille, the head nurse, said in an announcer's voice, "Stephen, the head nurse wants to see you." Okay, I'm on my way. I hope I don't have to deal with the TV crew this time. I don't know. But Christopher is definitely in a bad mood today. Thanks to our good fairy for the warning. Chief Thunder and Lightning. Stephen, what's up? Where have you been all night? The gray in my beard and the devil in my ribs. What's the matter, Christopher? How could I? I was just staying at a hotel so as not to provoke my wife into a conflict. You should be talking to her, not me. You didn't tell me what to do. You'll be on the street in no time. Don't you scare me. Christopher's bad, and times ain't what they used to be. I've been invited to other clinics many times, so Vanessa's lifeline is not the end of the line. He's talking. Application on the table. Stephen replied with a sneer. You got it, Gov. Not 5 minutes later, he returned to the chief's office with his resignation letter. Without raising his eyes from the desk, he signed it. Get out of here. What's the name of the town? Where did I pull you from? Reeves? Almost there. Kamyshin. Here we go. No one is allowed to behave like that to my daughter. Stephen turned toward the door. Now he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. After living with Jean for so many years, he felt that he had never become a real member of the Williams family. It wasn't that he wasn't accepted, but rather that he wasn't particularly eager to be watered. Ideally, he was expected to be silent, obedient, not to cross Jean, to do whatever Jean's father told him to do. But Stephen didn't want to, and he always had an opinion, and he really didn't like that. They're not her dads. At work, they sort of got along, but only because Christopher had to admit Stephen was a good doctor, had to admit it, but he never said it out loud. You know, Christopher, I should thank you now that we're breaking up when I'm still in my prime. I mean, I'll still have a job and a family. It's high time you took a well-deserved vacation with Jean's grandchildren. You'll never get any, because it's too late. She won't even marry again, because no one needs her. She wasn't even needed then. But I had to pay the price for my desire to change jobs. The price is very high. By the way, Christopher jumped out of her chair. Out, Stephen hummed and walked out. He felt so good after he had said it all. He was walking down the hall, and he wanted to boo. Of course, at that moment he ran into Camille. So what happened that you're smiling after going to the chief? He rounded on the head nurse. The best thing that could have happened, Camille. She looked at him in surprise. Raised your salary, promoted you. Stephen, don't tell me I've been fired already. Stephen gave the surprised woman one last twirl and walked on. She stared after him. Crazy. Find something to be happy about. Fired. It turns out that family life is over too. She shook her head and hurried away, that's all. That's the kind of news you don't get on the road. Stephen had a conversation with his wife ahead of him. He understood perfectly well that he could not expect any good from this conversation, but he was ready. What was it to endure her squeals for an hour or less when he'd endured them for so many years? Jean, I expected a very different turn. She was sure that her husband would come and apologize and urge her to talk to her father. She'd already prepared a lot of phrases to hurt her husband, but when he came home, she saw no trace of remorse. Jean sat back in her chair and turned away defiantly, but Stephen walked past her and pulled out his large suitcase. For 5 minutes, she just watched him in amazement, Then she came over. "What are you doing?" "Packing." "Why?" "But I think you'll at least think about it before you do." "I'm leaving, and I'm doing it with great pleasure." Jean was confused. Everything was not going at all according to plan. Not according to her plan, but to lose face is not a matter of losing face. "That's right. Go back to where we got you out of." Stephen turned to her. "You know I will." Jean was completely confused, but he picked up the suitcase and headed for the exit. "I'll file the papers myself." Stephen did not even expect that traveling by train would have such a positive effect on his psyche. Everything in the compartment was decorated in a modern style, and he enjoyed looking out the window, behind which flashed colorful summer landscapes. All the unpleasant things had faded into the background, and he no longer cared about his work at the clinic or his frantic wife. It was time for lunch. The man grabbed his jacket and opened the compartment door. At that time, a young woman was just passing by. It was easy to guess from her figure that she was pregnant. With a doctor's experienced eye, he determined that the lady was about to give birth. He had always been against any traveling of pregnant women in the last month. That's why even now, when he saw the negligent mother, he couldn't help himself and said loudly, "But where, tell me, will she go when she is going to give birth any day now?" That moms went. The sun was flooding the carriage of the fast train, so the doctor did not immediately see the woman's face. She was the first to recognize it. "Doctor, what meeting?" "Oh my goodness, I was going to visit my family." "And you are?" Stephen was a little confused. The journalist Evelyn was nothing like the shy girl in the ridiculous blouse he interviewed. "I have to check on someone too, and I just want to get away. I'm tired of work." "I'm tired too. You know, I've been sent all the time to places where I can't go. And everyone's demanding. Evelyn, it's so annoying that I was so happy to be pregnant. By the way, about your situation, shouldn't you be hitting the road?" "Oh, doctor, it's not a plane, it's a train. Nothing's going to happen to me." "Allow me an indiscreet question. Where's your husband?" "Kevin." "Is he working?" "He hasn't been released. And you shouldn't have risked it." Stephen thought to himself, "Kindergarten, by God." Out loud, he said, "If memory serves me correctly." "Evelyn." "Aha. You're trying to walk less. When's your due date?" "Oh, it's still 2 weeks away." The doctor didn't say anything to the girl, but thought to himself it would be good if the contractions started in a couple of days, not sooner. The man went to a restaurant, where he had a wonderful lunch. He was accompanied by a doctor he knew, with whom they had crossed paths several times at health meetings. They drank a glass of good wine and talked about the problems of modern medicine. When the interlocutor learned that at the moment Stephen is out of work, he even rejoiced. "Colleague, you have God sent me. We're short-staffed. You could say we're suffocating. There's not a single competent specialist in the maternity ward. Here's my card. I'll be waiting for your call." After dinner, Stephen went to his car, which was at the head of the train, and Stephen went to his own. But on the way to his carriage, he heard the frightened shout of the conductor. "Gentlemen, comrades, there is a doctor among you." A woman giving birth to a doctor rushed forward to the compartment the conductor was pointing to. "Are you a doctor? Let me through. You know, there's something wrong. I've delivered babies once before, but there's something wrong with this girl. Something wrong." "Don't yell at me. She seems conscious, but she's not responding or answering questions. She's not even screaming." "Everybody screams during labor." "I know. She's not screaming. Shouldn't we tell the trainmaster?" "Yes, absolutely. Tell them to stop the train at the nearest station and have an ambulance there." The conductor was about to run, but the doctor stopped her. "One more thing, please. There's a colleague of mine in the third car. Could you please call him? Because it's going to be difficult to manage alone." "Of course, doctor. We have a satellite link. We'll be in touch in a moment." At almost 2 o'clock, the doctor stayed with the girl. A friend of Stephen said, "And she should be drained. I'm afraid we're gonna lose our mom. Colleague, we'll try to make it on our own." especially soon the station. The passengers were excitedly discussing this unusual incident. Some gave examples from their own lives. Finally, there was a loud scream, and everyone shouted hooray. A man was born. The tired doctors also rejoiced at the successful resolution of the situation. Stephen asked the happy mother, "Do you even have diapers and clothes for the baby?" "Yes," powerless from the excitement, but smiling. "No, I didn't bring anything. I was told by the counselor that it's 2 more weeks." The conductor found a way out. "I have sterile diapers and diapers in my stash, just in case. Let's get you over here, quick." The doctor started rubbing the baby's body and noticed a small birthmark on his right breast. His eyes immediately went black. "Colleague, what's wrong?" A doctor he knew was offering him a bribe. "Wait, it happens. It's probably the pressure from the stress." "Well, maybe." Stephen looked at the baby and couldn't believe it was happening to him. And with a loud cry, the newborn broadcast to the world that there was one more person on the planet. Good value for the price, he scores 8.95. Such a high estimate was given to the newborn by Starepo's colleague, who had no idea what was going on in his heart. Half an hour later, the train stopped at the station. The carriage was immediately entered by doctors. On the platform, Stephen saw the ambulance and resolutely took his jacket from the hanger. He would reach it later, but now he would get off with Evelyn. In such a backwater, it was unknown whether there were any good doctors either. Evelyn was already lying on the stretcher. The girl, a nurse, wraps the baby carefully. "Oh, Stephen, I didn't thank you, but now you have. You don't know how grateful I am. I'm such a fool. But you could have waited." "I didn't. I thought once the baby's born, I won't be able to get to my mom for a long time. So I thought I'd go away for a few days." "Yes, your behavior is completely irresponsible." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Every time you and I meet, you rid me like a child." Stephen thought about the fact that Evelyn had just told the real truth. Well, that's just the way it is. He needs to find out what's even going on. The birthmark is too object to be a mere coincidence. Stephen tried to remember if his family had ever talked about Kamyshin. And the more he thought, the more he realized that only in connection with his work. On the other hand, Evelyn and her relatives could have come to this town from somewhere else entirely. "Do you get off at this station?" The young mother's voice brought him back to reality. "Yes, I'm afraid you may not get the help you need here." Those eyes didn't get huge. "So you're here for me, are you?" "Well, you could say it's for my peace of mind. I'm the one who delivered the baby. So I need to make sure you're okay." "Thank you so much. I've already called my husband, and he'll be here tonight." Oh, how he screamed. He was so scared. He was right to be. How could he even let you go? Evelyn smiled. He wouldn't let go. He was totally against it. "But you don't listen to anyone." "Why not?" "I do." Sometimes he laughed. "And Evelyn is very interesting and funny." The orderlies and took up the stretcher. Stephen picked up his suitcase and Evelyn's things. There was no maternity hospital in this godforsaken place, just a small wooden hospital with a children's ward. "I'm sorry, doctor." There was an old woman looking at him. She reminded him of the very doctor's assistant who had once met his young doctor in Kamyshin. "Yes, I'm a doctor. Who can I talk to?" "Well, Rick's at the clinic right now. He'll be here soon." "What, he's a receptionist and works here at the same time. But since he's the only one here, we're just waiting for his son to finish school, God willing. Then we'll have a strong 2 doctors." Stephen chuckled involuntarily. "Whole 2. It's not just 1, Rick. I'll go to the labor and delivery room, but go put on the booties." The woman handed him the booties. It was obvious he wasn't their first host. Stephen, gritting his teeth. "What's the matter?" Evelyn was lying by the window, which was open. There was no one else in the room. He silently put the things that no one in the hospital even paid attention to, and rolled the bed with the young mom farther away. The girl looked at him embarrassed. "You take care of me like that? I'm not even comfortable." "Stop it. You don't need to think about anything at all right now, just yourself and the baby. What are you going to name it? We haven't even thought about it yet. When my husband gets here, we'll decide. He heard some noise in the corridor, thought it was Rick, and he was not mistaken. The door swung open. But who do we have here? Rick was exactly as he had imagined. Stephen, short, with close-cropped hair and very lively eyes. And you must be the metropolitan doctor who delivered the baby. That's right. Well, Nanochka will take the tests now, and we can have a chat. They went out into the corridor. The nurse's station was empty. Somewhere else. We don't have any sick people here, just someone who refuses to go to the city hospital. But don't worry, we have everything we need. Rick talked himself through the ward doors, opening them one by one, to find the thread. Finally, in one of the rooms he saw her. Nana, the girl, who had been reading the book with rapt attention, flinched. That Rick, he so seemed to tease her that Stephen involuntarily smiled. Where are you supposed to be? But Rick, she ran out of breath when she saw that the doctor was not alone. Quickly she jumped up and headed for the post. They followed. So in the 6th room of a woman in labor with a baby answer head to get everything done and get diapers, skates. You don't have to. I'm going now. I'll buy everything. And I think tomorrow we can already transport them to the city. Well, the mom, obviously. It's a little early for the baby. I'm gonna get changed and go for a checkup. Are you coming with me? If it's okay, yes. Surprisingly, both Evelyn and the baby were doing well. Stephen smiled, but when her husband would arrive, she didn't answer. Probably only by evening, he decided to pick up his mom. That's a detour of almost 100 kilometers. Stephen's heart sank. That evening, he could probably find out where the child got such an object birthmark. I wonder if it's on her husband's line or Evelyn's. So far, he had no idea how he was going to do it, what questions to ask. He still went to the store. Strangely enough, there were 2 in the village, and in one of them he was able to buy almost everything he needed. Evelyn shook her hands when she saw what he had brought. Oh, Kevin, everything is lucky. You tell me, how much do I owe? I have money. I'll pay it all back later. Now think about milk and feeding your baby. Toward evening, Rick invited Stephen into his office. You've been on your feet all day. Let's go get something to eat. They sat down at the resident's desk. Stephen looked around. It feels like you live here. Rick laughed. You're almost right. As you can imagine, I'm the only doctor here. It's a bit of a grind. When my son lived at home with me, at least I had something to do. Now he's away at school, so I can devote all my time to my work. Pardon my indiscretion, but what about your wife? Valichka, no, not for more than 10 years. It's just the way it is. I treat people. I couldn't cure my wife. Sorry, nothing. They had just had time to eat dinner when Nina came knocking. Your woman in labor is in there. She's out of her mind. Stephen and Rick jumped out of their seats. They flew into the room just as Evelyn was trying to wrap the baby in a blanket. She was barely on her feet, sobbing, but she carried the baby anyway. Evelyn, what are you doing? Stephen took the boy from her. Evelyn looked at him with mad eyes. I need, you know. There's Kevin and Mommy. They've been in an accident. Stephen shivered. How do you know? I just got a call. Okay, don't panic. You don't know who's hurt or how badly. We need to find out first. Where are you and the baby going? What can you do for them? Just the baby. And you won't get far on your own. Rick was about to say something, but Nina came into the room. Rick, they'd brought 2 people in from the accident. They said they were taking them closer to the village immediately. Kevin's mom. Rick looked at Stephen. Can you give me a hand? Sure. He turned to Evelyn. Listen to me carefully. Evelyn, we'll do whatever we need to do, but please stay in the room with the baby so we don't have to worry about you. Only if we don't have to be distracted can we help your family. That's understood. Evelyn nodded. Rick rushed out of the room, throwing on the way. Nina Stephen ran after me. Evelyn's husband wasn't hurt very badly. After a cursory examination, it was clear that he had a couple of fractures and a few cuts that needed stitches. Nina escorted Stephen and Kevin into the examination room, where Stephen took over. He didn't know what was wrong with the woman because Rick and the EMT had rushed her somewhere down the hall. Kevin, writhing in pain, asked, "Tell me, my wife, how is she? Is she with you? She gave birth on the train." "Don't worry, Evelyn's fine." "What are you in for now? Can you talk to her?" "No, I'm not going." Stephen looked at the young man in surprise. "Why is that? What am I gonna tell her?" "I killed your mom. My wife's mom was riding with me. Who knows what happened to the steering wheel? It just started spinning freely at one point. No action on the wheels. But her mom's alive. Why are you burying her before her time? She's very hurt. I saw it. A landmine came through the door. Stephen, I'm asking you to come here urgently. I'll finish up here. There's a sign at the very end of the hall. Block." Kevin gave a startled gasp, and Stephen rushed down the hall. Rick was administering an IV to a woman. "Stephen, I don't know what to do. The damage was mostly to the abdomen. It's a huge loss. But that's not even the worst part. Something's damaged. She keeps losing blood. I've already contacted the city hospital, and they're sending a crash cart. But it'll be here in about 3 hours, at the earliest. They're bringing blood, and they're bringing a surgeon and a team. Even if they make it, which I highly doubt, we can't take her anyway. She'll die on the way. What are your thoughts?" "No thoughts. 10, 15 years ago, I would have said we should operate. There are no conditions, but human life now, I understand perfectly well that we can't do anything in such conditions without the right equipment." Stephen began to examine the woman. "Rick, I think we should try it." And then he hesitated. He looked at the woman's face. Vanessa. Rick turned to him in surprise. "Do you two know each other?" And then something clicked in Stephen's head, and everything fell into place. Vanessa Evelyn, the baby with the birthmark. No, it can't be. It can't be. "Stephen, there's nothing wrong with you." He looked at Rick with crazy eyes. "Is there anyone else we can call for help? Our nurse is old, but she's been an operating room nurse for years. Ninochka is inexperienced, but she's a good thinker. And 2 nurses who also work here. Page everyone. Let's get ready for surgery." Rick stood there for a second, looking at Sterhepo. "Are you sure?" "Yeah. We need to find the source of the bleeding. Then maybe they'll come in from the city." Rick jumped out of the office, out of the hallway. His voice came out. "Quickly, we're gonna get everybody into surgery right away." Stephen stood looking at Vanessa. How many years? It was over 20. Vanessa's face was pale, but he could still see that the years had not changed her much. Rick returned and Stephen went to change. In the hallway, he met a startled Evelyn. Tell me, how's Mom?" He looked at the girl, then took her hand. "I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty bad. There's a car on its way to us from town, but they might just not make it in time." Down the hallway toward them, Kevin was hobbling toward them. Evelyn. She turned around, threw herself into a hug. "Kevin, do something, please." He stroked her hair and looked at Stephen in silence. "Vanessa's O positive needs blood. I'm AB positive." Kevin, like in high school, raised his hand. "You can take it. I can take anything. Just save her," Evelyn cried, then raised her eyes to Stephen. "How do you know what kind of blood Mommy has?" Kevin looked at him too. "And how do you know what her name is?" "I didn't tell you." "Did you leave your papers in the car?" Stephen sighed. "We knew her once." Evelyn suddenly stopped crying. "How long ago was that?" "A long time ago, over 20 years ago." "Evelyn, I'll be sure to answer all your questions." But then Kevin followed me. Rick wasn't much. 1. And I called my colleagues in the area. He'll be in touch if he has any tips. Great. Let's get started. About 5 minutes after the operation began, 2 more girls appeared next to them. The assistant had already laid out the tools. Now Stephen would not have recognized this elderly woman with her concentrated face, the very almost grandmother who met him. After an hour and a half, they moved away from the table. Rick looked at everyone. "Thank you, colleagues. What we have all accomplished today is a true miracle. Now we just have to wait." Stephen stepped out into the hallway. He realized that he had to go and talk to Evelyn. Kevin was taken to her room. The conversation would probably not be very pleasant, but it could not be avoided. He pulled off his cap, pushed open the door of the room. Evelyn immediately jumped up. Mom's alive. I think everything will be all right now. The colleagues from the city will be here soon." Next to Kevin on the bed was a baby boy. The man looked at him fondly, almost unblinking. But when he heard Stephen, he raised himself up on one elbow. "Thank you, doctor, but I wasn't the only one there. Rick, what a god. It amazes me how many things one man can do in this town. A stomach doctor would never treat a cold." He sat down on the bed. Evelyn looked at him without looking away. "That's not all you wanted to tell us." He nodded. Then he looked up at Evelyn. "Evelyn, what blood type are you?" "Third negative." "Yeah. How do you know?" "I'm the same." She sat down next to him and looked confusedly at her hands, then at her husband. Kevin sat down too. "Am I to understand correctly that you are now going to tell us that Evelyn is your daughter?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "Apparently, yes. Really, I didn't know anything myself. I had all sorts of thoughts when I took in the big boy. He has the same birthmark as all the men in our line. But I didn't even think in that direction. Was going to find out, of course, through whom that birthmark came, through Evelyn or through Kevin." Then Vanessa saw it. Evelyn stood up. "And I always knew my daddy was Robert. I don't think you're right. It's just some kind of coincidence. Mom's gonna wake up and find out. Look at this." Kevin carefully turned the baby around with one hand that wasn't very comfortable, so Evelyn rushed over to help him. He was the one who was pointing at a birthmark of a very unusual shape. Stephen silently unbuttoned his shirt and showed the exact same one, only bigger. Evelyn was powerless. Sank down on the bed. "What is it?" "Daddy loved me. I never would have guessed." "He did." She looked up at Stephen. "Daddy died when I was 15. There was silence in the room. Stephen stood up. He could feel how tired he was. There just wasn't any energy left. There was a murmur in the hallway. He breathed a sigh of relief. Here came help. Vanessa had regained consciousness already in the car. It was decided to drive her in the morning. Another car was to come for Kevin and Evelyn with the baby. Stephen made the decision to go with Vanessa. He did not immediately decide after Evelyn asked, "You are not going to leave Mommy now. You saved her. Stick around at least until she's safe, sure. Don't worry, Evelyn. I'll be right here." He pulled the girl against him on some impulse, eyes shielding her. He only now suddenly realized that he had a daughter. He had a grandson, but no family. No one needs him. Tanya has everyone beaten, weak and sick, but all together. And he's still alone. Vanessa accused everything around her with a cloudy look, then focused her gaze on him. "You." He barely heard what she said, wanted to answer. Vanessa closed her eyes again. Kamishin met them with rain. Stephen thought that they had basically swapped an awl for a soap. As far as he remembered, the medicine here was also lame. But the car went down some unfamiliar street. Finally, it stopped in front of a beautiful new building and the doors opened. "Vanessa, what the hell is this?" Stephen watched in amazement as the entire staff of the new hospital clustered around Vanessa. He approached the driver. It felt like everyone knew her. The driver grinned. How could they not when she's the head doctor? As head doctor, she's the one who got this hospital from the administration. The building was supposed to be the new home of the officials, so she made it happen. Her daughter was attracted by that journalist or someone else on TV. After the reports, the officials came here and gave the building to them, and brought all the necessary equipment. No one knew Vanessa was hurt. She would have been carried out in their arms. That's weird. Evelyn didn't say anything about the mom being the chief of medicine. Maybe it would have been quicker. Vanessa never takes advantage of her position and forbids everyone. She says when a person moves into the category of patient, they become just a sick person, not a boss or a pipe cleaner. Stephen was confused and depressed. That's the interesting thing about life. It just loves to put people in a dead end. For example, take him back then. Many years ago, he had done an ugly, mean thing, but it was because life had dealt with him that way. Yes, he had to go away alone, because he knew perfectly well that Vanessa would become his ballast. But what if he wanted to accomplish something? He grinned bitterly. He had. At that age, back to where he'd started. So he wouldn't be needed in this hospital, because the saints would be looked after like queens. Then who would want him? The answer was self-evident. No one wanted him at all. He was sure that Evelyn didn't want to see him much either. He decided to get a hotel room, sleep, wash up, then say goodbye to everyone and go. Go where? Probably to Moscow. Something must be done about the dissolution of the marriage. Something must be done about housing. Stephen was sure that Jean would not want to part with a single meter of their housing so easily. But nothing he will fight. Especially now there is someone to fight for. The next day, he found out that Evelyn was being discharged this afternoon, and Kevin called him. Stephen, I don't know what your relationship with Evelyn will be, but you're the reason my son was born. So if you'd like to come down to the local maternity hospital at 200 hours. Thanks, Kevin. I'll be there. You tell me, where can I find a decent baby store in town? The mall on Lennon. I'll be there. I'll definitely be there. And Kevin said, and also, Evelyn, I have kind and fair. You don't think she'll hate you. Thank you, Kevin. You're not a very lucky man. He got his hopes up, called a cab, and rushed to the baby store. He thought long and hard about what to buy. He bought a stroller. He had no idea whether they already had one or not. I figured I'd get two, if anything. Evelyn greeted him with a smile. Hello. I didn't know you were coming. Well, how could I not? Stephen held out the flowers to Evelyn and looked inside the bag. Can I hold them? Help with Kevin's hand. Sure. How many small children has he held? 1,000, maybe more. But now that he had this little living lump in his arms, he wanted to cry. He could hardly contain himself. Not for long, though. My husband and I have decided to name our son Stephen. If it hadn't been for you. That's it. I can't hold back the tears now. Old age, I guess. He walked the happy parents home and headed to the hospital to see Vanessa. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he realized it couldn't be like before. Vanessa would be absolutely right to chase him away and forbid Evelyn from associating with him. Well then, he would leave, but he would still help both his grandson and his daughter. The girl who escorted him to the ward on the way told him that Vanessa Grigorievna is much better. She is already talking. That's good. The girl suddenly stopped. It was you who saved her. No, we all did it together. Everyone who works at the hospital, in that village. Vanessa turned her head at once. Her eyes widened. Stephen closed the door of the room. He came over and sat down on a chair. Hello, Vanessa. Hello, Stephen. So I wasn't dreaming about you. You're the doctor from the capital who saved me. Perhaps I should thank you. You don't have to. It's the least I could do for you. Vanessa, why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me. I didn't understand you. You didn't tell me about Evelyn. So you guessed. But it wasn't hard, considering I delivered the baby and saw the birthmark right away. So there you go. I wanted to tell you. I thought long and hard. I didn't know if you needed that information. But then I decided you had a right to know. I went to Moscow. It wasn't hard to find you. Only that day you had a wedding. I saw you, stood there and left, determined to forget you forever. Robert was waiting for me here, and I told him everything. All he said was he wished he killed you. Didn't kill you then. Stephen grinned. A pity indeed. What is it now? Nothing. Nothing's changed. Evelyn thinks of Robert as her father. Let's keep it that way. Evelyn knows everything. I told her. Vanessa closed her eyes. Why are you going back to Moscow? Why do you have to stir things up now? Stephen got up and walked to the fire. For some reason, I decided I wanted to. There's nothing keeping me there. I'm divorcing my wife. I don't have a job there anymore. I worked at my father-in-law's clinic. So one thing follows from another. I should have stayed then. But maybe it's not too late now. She looked at him closely. You're kidding. No. What jokes? I've realized a lot in these few days I've been here. That's when I gave up everything to go after a better life, leaving you alone. What's the result? Now I got nothing again. No position of disrespect, no family you left behind. And now every man in this town speaks your name with a kind of reverence. You have a daughter and now a grandson. You have everything. I'm not jealous. I mean, it's the right thing to do. You earned it all. And I got what I deserve. Vanessa was silent. He stood for a moment, then moved toward the door. Okay. I'm sorry. Of course you're right. You don't want me to let you in my face. You're absolutely right. It's a good thing I didn't help, didn't raise, and got a grown daughter right away. It would have been too easy. I'll leave tomorrow. I'm sorry. He grabbed the doorknob and heard it. I have a position at the hospital as head of the maternity ward. The current head has been asking for a well-deserved retirement for a year, and I have no one to replace him. He froze, then turned around. Vanessa, you're sure you won't regret your offer? She grinned weakly. Of course I will. Stephen set to work with enthusiasm. At first, for now, all the issues with the division of property. He was given an apartment not far from the hospital. The rent was a pittance. The apartment was quite small, but it was quite decent inside. The first day, he contacted a lawyer he knew in Moscow and told him to start divorce proceedings. Your wife never worked. No, I see where you're going with this. We'll divide everything according to our conscience, but you have to offer her to buy my share because I'm not going back. Oh yeah, so where does the best doctor in the world live now? Stephen laughed where she used to send me and my dad all the time. Everyone on the ward looked at him with a kind of morbid curiosity. He knew exactly why. Not only was he not a local from the capital, but as it turned out, he was an acquaintance of their head doctor. And that was interesting, considering that they were almost the same age. Stephen visited Vanessa every day, under the pretense of talking about work. They both knew that work had nothing to do with it, but they were careful to pretend that it did. After each shift, Stephen stopped by Evelyn's house. She was genuinely happy to see him. And Kevin smiled and said that as soon as his arm was healed, he would take Stephen fishing. Everything was rolling along, but there was still something unfinished in the air. When Vanessa is discharged, everything will fall into place. But he didn't think they could continue to communicate like this. Every day more and more he realized one thing could always be considered lost. And only the time spent next to Vanessa was bright and somehow real. A month passed, and Vanessa, finally, she left the hospital with her own feet and breathed a full breath. God, it felt good. I never understood why patients disliked hospitalization so much. Now I realized Stephen was standing a little apart. He didn't want to disturb them. Evelyn hugged her mother and led her to the car. He sighed. How lucky is it to have someone to hug like that? Stephen walked toward the hospital, but he heard Dad, aren't you with us? He froze. Hearing those words, he slowly turned around. No, there was no mistake. Except for them, there was almost no one on the street. Tunas looked at him and smiled. Let's go. I set the table. Kevin's mom is babysitting Stephen, so we have to hurry, because our son has a temper. And he looked at Vanessa. If she wasn't happy, he'd say no. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But Vanessa looked at him calmly, even as if affectionately. I'm going, of course I'm going. I just thought you wanted your family." He rushed toward them. "Dick." The man even stumbled. Only one man had such a nasty voice. "Jean, hadn't you forgotten your wife?" She slammed the door of the expensive car and moved toward them. "Stephen, stop freaking out. We've all been a little overreacting, both Dad and you. But face it, you were wrong first. Dad is willing to take you back if you apologize for what you said." He saw Vanessa's face change. "She's a purse, but we won't get in your way," and moved toward the car. Evelyn stood for a moment and followed her mother. Stephen turned to Jean. "Why did you come here? I don't understand. We've decided everything. I honored your wish and went back there. Where do you think I belong?" "Stephen, enough already. Are you really ready to sacrifice a normal life for all this?" Jean made a vague gesture with her hand. Stephen suddenly calmed down. He followed Kevin's car with his eyes. What didn't escape Jean? "And I did not understand. Have you found yourself a provincial seagull already here?" She laughed. "But you surprised me. I thought you were already incapable of anything. But you're still capable of conquering someone. Well, maybe you're willing to give up everything for some countrywoman." He came right up to Jean. "Did you get here on time?" "No, really, if I didn't look at you now, at your behavior, I wouldn't have realized what a worthless life I've lived. Tell me, Jean, why do you live? You're of no use to anyone. You leave no one behind. There's a man. But if you take him out of the world, no one will notice. You're that kind of person. Jean, a parasite." The woman even choked with indignation. "Who the hell are you? My dad won't let you work here." Stephen laughed. "You just don't browbeat, not out of anger." He almost ran down the sidewalk. Now he knew exactly what he had to do. Somewhere nearby, he saw a convenience store, just what he needed right now. Vanessa was sitting at the table, picking at her plate with her fork. "Mom, you're not eating anything." "I don't feel like it, daughter." She really didn't feel like it. The only thing she wanted to do right now was to curl up in her pillow and sob like what? How could she fall back in love with someone who'd done that to her? Her brain was trying to tell her that she probably never stopped loving him. But Vanessa didn't want to hear those thoughts. Kevin stood up. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. That's all. Look, he won't go with her. I don't know him that much, but he seemed like a normal guy to me." Vanessa grinned at Kevin. "What's your point? What are they getting at? What do you think, Vanessa, that we don't see anything, don't understand anything? Why did you leave them there? You could have waited. So he thinks we've all abandoned him, and no one wants him here." Evelyn looked at her mother. She thought so too, but she didn't say anything. Vanessa sighed. "The most important thing is whether he needs us, and that can only be decided by him, not his wife. We can't help him with that." She got up. "I'm going to lie down. I'm tired." Vanessa didn't make it to her room before the doorbell rang. Who could it be? "Kevin, open up. Maybe someone's here to see you." Kevin shrugged. Who could be here to see them if they lived in another city, and all their friends are there? He opened the door and smiled broadly. "I knew you'd come." "Vanessa." "Where?" "In the room." Stephen was barely visible behind the huge bouquet of roses. He quickly threw off his jacket and moved into the room. Kevin followed him. Vanessa looked at him in surprise. He handed her the flowers. She took the bouquet out of surprise and then knelt down and handed Vanessa the box with the ring. "Vanessa, I should have done this years ago, but I was cowardly. I acted like a pig and not a man. I'm asking if you can. I'm sorry if you can't. I'm prepared to take reproach from you for the rest of my life. But I'm begging you, marry me. I'm not divorced yet, but it's only a matter of time. I can't do it without you. I've been thinking that only the time we've been together has any meaning at all." Vanessa looked at Stephen, confused and surprised at the same time. She certainly realized that he felt something for her, but to give her a ring like that without a second thought. "But, Mom, how many times? You love him. We can see that." Evelyn couldn't help herself. And as if to confirm her words, little Stephen, who was being held by Kevin, farted loudly, yes, so that it was distinct. Aha! They laughed. Stephen held on the longest, but after a minute he was laughing with everyone else. Vanessa, wiping away the tears that had come from laughter, or something else, said to wash the dishes one at a time. Stephen grinned, ready to take on that responsibility completely. Vanessa immediately replied, "Don't let anyone hold your tongue." He laughed and was finally able to pull Vanessa against him. He could feel her heart pounding, or maybe it was pounding with his heart. It didn't matter. They were still beating in unison. Subscribe and click the bell.
Maria sat on this sand, admiring the enchanting skyline of the Baltic Sea, sitting just like that. Maria was dressed in short athletic, almost men's shorts, dirty yellow in color, and the most ordinary black t-shirt sat cross-legged, resting her elbows on her skinny knees. Cold sand stuck to the exposed areas of her skin, absorbent cotton, and the illuminating wind blew her disheveled hair straight into her face. Maria came to this place whenever she felt her strength was running low, always when she needed a reboot and mental calming. Today had been a difficult day. From early morning and practically until lunchtime, she ran through various interviews where she was turned around, immediately recognizing Maria's peculiar past, where she was poked and prodded by the fact that the girl had no experience at all. Poked as one pokes a small, worn kitten with its muzzle. As a rule, a kitten does not understand what it has done wrong, no matter how hard and with how much enthusiasm it is poked. That's how Maria didn't understand. How could she get experience if they don't take her anywhere without it? But no one gave her an answer to this unspoken question, and no one could give her an answer. And she had no older adult relatives who could support her, at least emotionally. That's why now she just sat there, trying to abstract herself from all the problems, deeply breathing in the fresh sea air, sitting and trying to take away the feeling of awkwardness and even fear that had haunted her all today. Maria was only 19 years old, and she had not yet managed to get any education other than schooling. Immediately after coming of age, Maria had to move, like all the others, her classmates, from the orphanage to the home where she had grown up and where she had been formed as a person. The good thing is that she had a place to move to. The state provided her with a tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of her beloved and native Finland. The girl was sure that she was not fabulously lucky. I bring up many of her friends. I study together with her and have not yet had time to provide housing. Maria would like to go to some college to study, or even better, a university. But she had no illusions about studying on a budget, although she had a state benefit. In addition, the apartment was already precious, and for utilities had to pay for themselves and a lot. Even with subsidies and Mars, his maintenance was also expensive. No matter how it went, it turned out that first you need to look for a job that would allow you to provide for your existence, and then to study at a correspondence or evening. That was the story of Mars. Maria found him on the day of his birth and immediately realized it was fate. A poor, obviously abandoned cat met her not far from the grocery store. All shabby, thin and wary, leaning on every passerby, ready to run away at the slightest danger, but still hoping for human support, it was obvious. Despair, pain, and the mute question for what? It was quite clear that before the terrible tragedy, his life had been quite prosperous in the best of times. Now there was a huge scar on the poor thing's back that had not yet healed when that fluffy fur had been mauled by unpleasant sorcerers. And there was a look of fear in her eyes. Maria just couldn't pass by this unfortunate sufferer. With her last money, she paid for expensive veterinarian's appointments, and, unable to part with the cat, kept it. So the fate of the girl was determined. Now she had to look for a job as soon as possible. After all, it was necessary to provide not only herself, but also a living defenseless creature that she so unwisely, giving in to momentary pity, sheltered. Since then, several months have passed, and Maria has had time to work at various and even unusual jobs. But for some reason, she never managed to stay long with a job as a hotel cleaner. She was simply fired without explanation. She was removed from her position as a beauty salon administrator. The daughter of her friend's daughter, her boss, needed this job. The job of a sales consultant was also not given to the girl. She was immediately kicked out of the place, realizing that she was too shy and could not perform their direct duties, namely to bore the few visitors to the expensive boutique. Maria also managed to work as a cashier at a gas station, but from there she had to leave by herself. Two bailiffs turned out to be motorists and colleagues. And the night shift in general, the young graduate of the orphanage had real problems from work. Today could have been no different from the previous day. But a miracle happened, and Maria was hired for a new job. Sitting now on a deserted beach, she still remembered how nervous she was at today's interview, how stupidly her eyes ran, and how she didn't know where to put her clumsy hands. And it came out like this. Since the morning of the escape, half the town already desperate, Maria skillfully took to her last interview, not even hoping that luck would suddenly smile on her. She was going to try out for the position of a waitress in a small coastal cafe. The girl had no experience in this capacity, and barely seeing the menacing look of the elderly owner of the establishment, she wanted to leave without starting the interview. But the hoarse lord of the voice stopped her halfway. "Would you care to open your pretty mouth and explain to me why I should hire you? Considering you've never held your nose in your life, what did you expect when you came here?" The owner of the cafe asked sternly. He was a short, thin old man. His bright blue eyes were hidden behind thick gray, wide eyebrows, and thin pale lips were almost invisible from behind a lush mustache. "I'm just looking for a job." "I'm sorry," Maria replied modestly and sank her gaze. She was already on her way out of his office. My hand rested on the round knob, and the only thought going through my mind was God, genius. Just get out of here. Busy. The old man smirked and folded his arms across his chest in a closed posture, not expressing anything good for the interlocutor. Isn't there any more suitable job in this city for such a young and beautiful girl? I clearly indicated vacancies with at least a year of experience. Maria blushed deeply. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. It's just that I've already gone through all the websites and newspapers with vacancies. This is my 6th interview today. I'm sorry again for bothering you." She grabbed the doorknob again. But he didn't let her go again. There was a twinkle in the man's eyes. It was either interest or indignation. "Why do you need a job so urgently? Don't your parents help?" The girl, still holding herself by the doorknob, unconsciously pressed it even harder. "I don't have parents. I grew up in an orphanage." She looked at him with some challenge, as if to say, "Well, now you know everything, you can finally send me away." The cafe owner frowned. "Is that so? Well, in that case," he rose from his table. "In that case, how's your learning curve, baby? In a week you can figure out this job wide-eyed." The girl glowed with happiness. "Yes, of course, I'll try my best." The sullen old man suddenly smiled warmly. "Well, that's good. My name is Nick. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I'll show you around, tell you all about it. The waitresses will help you with that too. You owe me your passport, medical, and employment records. Do you have it?" "Yes," nodded a completely happy Maria. "Of course I do." She gave the old man the most radiant smile she was capable of. And it was as if he had changed from the evil mutterer whose grandfather had no trace of him. Now a handsome gray-haired man with a smile and slightly tired eyes was sitting in front of her. "Well, Maria," calling her by her first name, he tentatively accepted the resume. "Nice to meet you. See you tomorrow, and don't be late. I don't like lazy people or boring people. Don't worry. I'm used to getting up very early," assured him the girl, and left the cafe with a happy drinking heart. And left alone with himself, Nick thoughtfully nodded to some of his thoughts or memories, picked up the telephone receiver, Dopatopic risky apparatus, standing on his immaculately neat desk and dialing a number, said to his invisible interlocutor, "This is orphanage number 27. I'd like to speak to someone from the administration." "About what? About one of your graduates?" "Yeah, okay, I'll hold." Sure." And Maria, having spent about 40 minutes on the embankment, returned to his home, having passed in order to save money 4 kilometers on foot, and burst into the apartment with a triumphant exclamation. "Mars, Mommy is already home." Fluffy, well-fed cat lazily pulled up gracefully, came out of the only room. Black gray neck glistened, and yellow eyes were still half closed. Seeing that the furry lounger had passed all day waiting for his mistress, he glanced at his mommy, gave a short poke in greeting and rubbed at her feet. "Hello, hello," she rubbed the cat on the head. "After all, now you cannot say that you were once skinny and plush. Look at this, a man in full bloom." Laughing, she lifted the cat into her arms. The one didn't even think of resisting and parted like Kissel in the arms of his savior. Gratefully silent. "And I have a job," triumphantly told him Maria. Yes, I've been hired." She turned the cat to her face, taking him under her front paws. Mars immediately twisted out of her arms and skipped briskly towards the bowl. He squawked loudly, as if complaining that he hadn't been fed in at least a week. The girl smiled warmly. Yes, my good man. I need a job to feed you." She followed the cat into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bag of power food for her pet and a small red-green apple for herself. One would have thought that the girl was on a diet, so she was restricting herself from dinner. But unfortunately, she had no money for more substantial food. Everything went to feed this sick, voracious creature. Maria didn't regret it one bit. So much for the trouble. Having finished the base of the apple and leaving only a couple of seeds from it, Maria began to prepare for tomorrow. She ran to the shower, twisted her short hair into simple rubber bands, and began to sort out her unpretentious closet, intending to look her best. She wanted to really shine. Late at night, Maria lay in bed and twisted from side to side without stopping. She couldn't fall asleep, and her mind was spinning with all sorts of frightening thoughts. What kind of team is there? What if I don't succeed? What if I'm cheated? And if to stir her consciousness, the questions did not stop and did not let her sleep. The first day of work, it's the most important one. She finally fell asleep, she thought. It wasn't until the morning. But contrary to Maria's worries, her first day at work went smoothly, even though she wasn't allowed to see visitors yet. But she had already gotten a full understanding of the workplace. Nick seemed like a real bitch to her now. He was muttering to himself every now and then. He noticed even the smallest flaws in the work of his subordinates. And when Maria was already sure that she would not see this job as her ears, the owner of the cafe praised her. He said that she did a great job, and very soon will be able to start a real job with official enrollment in the staff. Maria was not told this rata because Nick promised a decent salary and hinted at possible tips, which she could dispose of at her discretion. The amount that the owner of the establishment named, she had never held in her hands before, and that was for a month. In the other jobs, Maria received at most half of the sum quoted. But not everything was as good as it might seem at first glance. The collective, in which Maria was destined to work, turned out to be not exactly pleasant. Of course, some of these people were quite nice and kind, and some, to put it mildly, they were very peculiar personalities. Adriana, for example. The manager of the cafe was a low-slung, stocky, tightly bunched, middle-aged woman. Her face was pleasant, well-groomed, her manner polite. But all this was only at first glance. If you talked to her closer, it and the new girl Adriana pulled Maria's hand, and she almost dropped the tray shaking in her hands. "Are you deaf?" "No," Maria answered quietly. "Why?" she also asks. "Look at you. Doesn't anything embarrass you?" Puzzled, the girl looked at her hands at her clothes. Then she shifted her gaze to the half-empty hall at this time of day. Most of the tables were vacant, and bored girls and waiters were either flirting with the bartender on duty or scattered in corners in the back room, immersed in their smartphones. "Please tell me straight," Maria finally pleaded. "What am I supposed to notice?" Adriana rolled her eyes due to her small stature. She was looking down at her charge, and if you couldn't hear their conversation, you would think from the outside that it was Maria who was reprimanding her boss as a subordinate. That was the thought that occurred to one of the waitresses bored nearby, and she even shook her head to chase it away. It's an obsession. Wow, Glitch is amazed. She said to herself, You could use one of those, couldn't you? Look at you. Adriana, meanwhile, looked at all our girls. They all look like real models. It's important for business. The visitor should be pleasant to look at those who serve him. What are you? She carelessly grabbed the unfortunate girl by the edges, her long t-shirts brightly adopted. Where did you find that rag in a dumpster? How could you dress like that? I'm asking you. Maria lowered her gaze again and examined her clothes once more. She was wearing thin black tights and her most favorite t-shirt with a funny cat face on it. She burst out nervously. Nick had said I would wear a uniform, and until they gave me one, I dressed as best I could. Adriana seemed to boil over with anger. I couldn't do it well, tastes absolutely nothing. And at the same time, go take a look at your face. She waved a small, full hand in front of Maria's face. Besides, you need to grow your hair out. You look like a kid. And learn how to do a proper makeup. Ideally, of course, a nose to the forehead. What did he see in you? Oh, of course. How could I forget? Poor, poor, poor orphan. Squeaky, cool, theatrical voice stretched Adriana. Ah, it's disgusting to watch. And the manageress, deliberately hitting Maria with her heavy shoulder, went away to the back rooms. And the newly appeared waitress, and a lump came to her throat, put the tray on the table and ran to the restroom. There she washed her face with cold water and dared to look at herself in the mirror. In the reflection was a young, quite pretty girl, quite short haircut. Beating all the big nicknames of hair was gathered in a small ponytail on the top of her head. Since the hair was short, in the ponytail was able to gather only a small part of them, and the rest of the cheerfully fluttered and were free from the multicolored shrinking rubber band's large green shade. The eyes hid behind hollow and long, naturally dark lashes. The plump lips trembled, giving away Maria's last efforts to hold back from finally bursting into tears. She turned in profile, wiggling her nose. It was indeed slightly larger than average. It was a beautiful, large nose with a slightly noticeable gorilla. Maria's favorite kindergartners had always told her it was a real Greek nose. The guys, classmates, speculated in jest that she had maybe Georgians or Italians in her ancestry. But all these insinuations quickly stopped already in the 6th grade, when from a small, ridiculous girl, Maria began to gradually turn into a fragile teenage girl. Her unusual beauty silenced the evil tongues, and their owners to seek reciprocity in the first love. Generally speaking, in general, Maria has never been complex about her appearance. But today, after all the harsh words Adriana had said, she wasn't sure that she was really beautiful. Well, or at least just pretty. And that t-shirt god, what was she thinking? Maria shook her head and chased the horrible thoughts away, and resolutely walked out of the restroom into the narrow hallway. She immediately bumped into another waitress. Oh, Maria, I'm sorry. Thank God, it was the most ordinary, simple, and without any special pretensions girl. From the looks of it, she was a little older than Maria herself, and there was nothing in her appearance to catch the eye. Just an ordinary, rather nice girl. Nothing. And you, I'm sorry, let me remind you what your name is. Maria tried to smile across the morgue at the blush in your eyes, Emily. The girl smiled amiably. It's not a big deal. Don't take offense at Dasha. She is not like that. And most importantly, do not be afraid of her. She's just a little mean. She has a complex because of her height. I'm not an easy fate, you know. Yes, Maria nodded. Thank you. I understand. You should. Emily perked up. You know, maybe we could go for a walk after work, and I'll call Molly. She's a waitress too, and she's smart, remember. If you get the job, we'll work the same shift, the 3 of us. She tilted her head to the side and squinted her sly eyes. Sure, I'm all for it. Maria looked at her new friend gratefully. Listen, can you show me everything here and explain it to me properly? I don't know who to turn to. Nick seems to be in a bad mood. Emily laughed today, never in a bad mood. Of course he is. Come on. She took Maria under her arm and dragged her into the large kitchen. There Maria was introduced by the cook to the various technical staff and finally to one of the bartenders who had come here for a snack. After the shooting, each of the employees here was supposed to have a hot lunch. And if like this, Alec tried to be close friends with the kitchen. One could not worry about his food at all. Maria noted to herself that not everyone here was happy about the addition to the team, but there were no more like that horrible Adriana. Maria breathed a sigh of relief. It was better that she was not noticed at all than to be noticed and biased. Otherwise, apart from this incident, the day had been quite fruitful. At the end of the shift, 3 young girls were walking along one of the city embankments. They stopped at a small stall with ice cream and bought some for themselves. Maria, citing the fact that she does not like sweets at all, did not buy herself a dessert. In fact, she simply did not have money for it, and she was ashamed to admit that she was starving. They sat down together on a bench with a beautiful view of the water and began to talk animatedly. "Well, tell me about yourself. Where are you from, and what are your hobbies? Why did you decide to work with us?" Emily licked her ice cream with one eye, looking at her new colleague. "Oh, I don't know what to tell you. I am the most ordinary," Maria answered reluctantly. "Born and raised here." "Why did you take the job?" "Wherever they took me, that's where I got a job." She smiled a little. "I always wanted to be a marketer. Advertising, the service industry, has always been interesting. So I wanted to learn how the business worked from the inside." Molly, sitting on the very edge of the bench, lazily raised her voice. "Then why didn't you go to school? Why didn't you go to school?" Molly was older than the other girls. Tall, slender brunette. Dark eyes looking at the world distrustfully, and at her friends looking down on her. Maria squirmed involuntarily. She was embarrassed. Turned away from her new friends. "There is no possibility," she muttered. "That's why I need money to work at once." "But the opportunity is always philosophical," said one, taking out of the pocket of his coat a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. When smoking with Riva, eyes sighed. "There would be a desire and brains," she grinned. "With brains you can even enter on a budget get any kind of scholarship." "Yes, but I have to pay the rent. And I have a gluttonous cat." "In general, it's all hard," with sadness in her voice, said Maria. Emily came back into the conversation, almost partitions in the play with their ice cream. "But still, what kind of a good soul is our chief? No offense, Maria, but you're not doing a very good job. I mean, work-wise. And Nick took pity on you for being so inept." "He's so hard on the others, though." Emily giggled. "But please don't take offense again." Molly commented strangely and looked at poor Maria with a sidelong glance. It gave her goosebumps. "Why did he take you on so quickly?" "I remember when I was setting up on my own. It was hell. He's a real pedant in our neck of the woods, and he needs experience, skills. Yeah, he even chases the cleaners around like they should be scrubbing floors and prepping the ore. I wonder why he's so attracted to you." Not to enlighten us in confidence, she turned to Maria and perhaps accidentally, or perhaps deliberately, released a cigarette smoke right in her face. "Non-smoker." Maria immediately coughed and waved her hand, chasing away the nastiness from the morgue. I don't know." She shrugged off the cough. "Maybe she saw potential in me." "Don't be ridiculous." Molly glared angrily at the girl. "You live with your parents. Why do you pay the rent?" Maria answered, trying to make her voice sound more confident. "No, I live alone. I have no parents and no one. I'm on my own." Oh, Molly stretched out. "That makes sense then. Poor orphans." Maria was taken aback. She had never been reproached so often in her life. Her lack of family, as she had been today, as if it was her fault, as if her orphanhood was somehow her advantage. "So?" she asked, almost defiantly. "I'm worse than anyone else because of it. Did I react faster?" "No, of course not." "What is this nonsense? You misunderstood Molly." She threw a judgmental look at her friend. "Oh, calm down, both of you," lazily muttered Dimka. "I didn't mean anything wrong. It just explains such an unbelievable zeal for you, dearie. He's one of yours, too." "What kind of ours are they?" Maria asked. She was already seriously angry, and in such a state she was ready to fight to the last drop of blood, defending her good name. Of course, she immediately realized what Molly was getting at, but she wanted her to be embarrassed and explain her words. "From the orphanage." "Not the least bit embarrassed," Molly shrugged. "That's why he took you in right away. You told him you were an orphan." I did? Maria marveled. Emily seemed surprised, too. How did you know that? From the camel. Smirked contentedly at the deal. I know a lot of things. You just have to pay attention. She tossed her cigarette butt into the trash can and pulled on a 6, rose to her feet. Well, come on, I've got to go. That day, Maria was very surprised to learn that her boss had grown up in an orphanage. It had always seemed to her that children without parents were unlikely to succeed in life. It seemed that those like herself were not capable of anything more than a simple average life. One day, one of the tutors said something to them, all that stuck in Maria's memory for years and years to come. He said, "Don't get hit and go to jail, and your life is already a success. Remember? It will be much harder for you not to give in to temptation than for everyone else." Then Maria thought with fear that her life was probably doomed in advance. She stopped dreaming, lost her youthful hope for a beautiful, bright future, and her only goal remained this very not to sleep. Maria didn't even hope for a more favorable life, not until she met Nick in person. He was quite successful. Although the girl did not know how exactly her boss lived, whether he had a family, children, what does he do besides his main activity? But she was sure, this is what success looks like. Yes, he was sometimes quite rude, cynical in statements incredibly demanding. I mean, he had his own cafe. He's an orphanage boy. He managed to become the owner of his own business, the boss of a rather large team. After this message, Maria had a deep respect for the chief. From now on, no nagging from him could not break this strong feeling of hers. He became her ideal model, a living proof of the fact that even an orphanage orphan can achieve something worthwhile in life thanks to him, because of the mere fact of his existence. Maria had a purpose in life again. I have a dream that someday I'll have my own place. Yes, I will. Maria thought to herself. I lie in the arms of my favorite cat before going to bed. Her days of labor were changing one after another. The girl, engrossed in her new and promising, as it seemed to her, work, almost did not notice how the days flew by, how the seasons changed. She greedily absorbed all the information about the restaurant business, with interest, watching how her boss works. Although Maria was the simplest waitress, she tried to delve into all the intricacies of this activity. She closely followed the work of the cooks, tried to discreetly observe the harmful manager of the institution, watched how masterly work bartenders. She wanted to understand how to manage her business competently, to understand and learn this skill. The girl's salary was more than decent. Now she had enough for both the cat and herself. Although she didn't spoil herself with anything like that. Sisma Tolsta is accustomed to be satisfied with little expensive clothes, did not buy for food. Did not spend a lot, even a new phone was not in a hurry to buy. And only Mars invariably received all the best and regular examinations by a veterinarian. The life of our heroine was gradually getting better, and she even began to save money, hoping in the near future to enroll in the correspondence department of a specialized university. Someday dreamed of her, and she will be able to open her own establishment and a small cafe or even a restaurant. Although the girl was sometimes afraid of Nick, but she learned a lot from him. In fact, he was not as strict as he wanted to seem at first glance. Yes, with the staff he was tough, nagged, told off, noticed all the little insignificant missteps. But in rare moments, when Maria happened to be with him for some reason, then Nick Dober calmed down. He was happy to share his knowledge with the girl, seeing how she was drawn to it and eager to learn something new. He was happy to notice how she differed from the other waitresses and saw in Maria's big eyes a true, genuine interest in her work. While her co-workers were rushing home to finish their shifts, Maria was always ready to stay longer and help others if needed. She worked tirelessly, trying to improve everything around her. And after a few months, Nick himself began to consult with the young waitress in some matters. For example, it was Maria who advised the man to introduce a seasonal drink in the menu, which could be obtained for free. After the 5th visit to the cafe, the girl herself took the initiative to advertise the place on the internet. She created a page of the cafe in social networks. Not to mention that every day, passing by a small field, Maria brought a bunch of fresh flowers to work and beautifully decorated the central window. Noticing that the customers were attracted by the unusual interior, she persuaded the owner to buy some small things at the town flea market and arranged and hung them in the hall herself. Then they sewed new curtains. Then there was no end to the various innovations organized with Maria's light hand. At first, I just grumbled squeamishly, more for show. What else did that girl get into her head? And already spend a fortune on the restoration of this junk, which she calls, and vintage chairs. But gradually, there were many more visitors, and Nick was now often in a state of deep satisfaction. But who would have thought it would quietly and humbly turn out to be so creative? More than once and more than twice. The old man praised himself for such a valuable acquisition, smiling into his fluffy mustache and peering contentedly at the provoking waitress. Once in one of the most usual working days, there was another usual for Maria clash between her and the manager. Enraged by something, Adriana quickly moved towards Maria's side. Her eyes were burning with anger and her hands were clenched into fists. Hey you! Come here!" angrily hissed the manager to the gentleman. What did Maria think this time? She was already so used to the way Adriana behaved that not one of that pile of hurtful words that the manager functioned with didn't touch her in the slightest anymore. Oh, and it was obvious that she disliked Maria far more than the rest of them. Why didn't that question have a coherent answer? Perhaps it was some unconscious dislike, or perhaps something else. Figuring out the reasons for her constant discontent, Maria had no desire. What's wrong? Maria lowered her voice, fearing that one of the visitors might overhear them. The customers are complaining about you. I'll fire the hell out of you, shouted the manager, not paying attention to the surprised customers. That with surprise stretched Maria, complained about her. That can't be right. Who? When? I don't believe you, she said firmly, and added, by the way, you have no right to fire me. That's Nick's responsibility. We'll see about that, Adriana whispered quietly. Those 3 men you served last night, that's who complained about you. I'm gonna tell the chief, just so you know. If I don't, he will. He won't worry. Maria's thinking, what other men? What could have been disgruntled? She went through in her thoughts all those visitors that had served yesterday and could not understand who exactly she was talking about. Everyone seemed to be satisfied, she thought, and she was generally right, that satisfied customers could be identified by one simple criterion: the number of tips. Maria invariably left much more for the tip than was left. This she, and annoyed, and even pissed off sometimes her colleagues. But what was she to do? Perhaps it was because she was a little more friendly and a little less arrogant. Trying to remember who Adriana might have been talking about, she suddenly realized for sure it was the same drunken idiots. Last night, just before the cave closed, 3 dubious-looking men had piled into the room. Maria immediately realized that they were already well drunk. It was noticeable not only by the stellar behavior of the men, but also by, respectively, the ambergris that emanated from their warm company. And yet Maria, putting on a friendly smile, approached their table. Good evening. Are you ready to order? The drunkest of the party, and obviously the oldest of them, stepped forward. Get a Coke and a drink, and hurry up. Maria covered her eyes, trying to regain her former friendliness. What exactly can I get you? She reached over to the menu on the table to open the page that listed the alcohol available. Pick something specific, and I'll get it to you in a jiffy. But the man poked at random at the menu and got married, if you will. Maria smiled dazzlingly and was about to move to the coffee bar, and suddenly received a very sensitive slap from one of the customers just below her back. In addition, he once again shouted after her at a run, and loudly and completely horse-like barked. Maria, dumbfounded by such insolence, remained silent and hurried away from the table to a safe distance. She flashed with indignation, went to the bar, and said to James Berman, "What kind of assholes are these? I hate them." The guy, not at all distracted from making cocktails, and stretched in response. Yeah, it happens." And Maria continued to resent him. "And we don't have male waiters. What am I supposed to do? I don't want to serve them." She looked hopefully at her colleague. "Maybe you served them." "Oh no, baby," James said. "I'm not that kind of guy. You'll have to do it on your own." Maria frowned and took a deep breath. She took the order for the unpleasant men and, trying not to show her anger, went back to the table. For the next hour, the tipsy customers drank again and again, and it seemed that there was no end to it. They were making noise and behaving in a completely inappropriate manner. The girl even managed to regret that the institution works until the last customer. It had been her idea, but all things must come to an end. When the drunks asked for the bill, Maria was overjoyed. "Well, go away," she thought to herself with relief. Leaving, one of the drunken men called the waitress again. "Hey, honey, come with us for a walk. But don't say no. I don't like to be refused." He smiled predatorily and approached Maria almost closely. Poor thing was immediately infected by the thermonuclear smell of alcohol from his open mouth. She instinctively almost vomited. "No, thank you. I need to go home. Not without me, bitch." He grabbed Maria's arm roughly. "Let's go," I said. Maria stared helplessly. Unfortunately, there was no help from anyone. James was cleaning glasses with a serious face. All the other girls had long since gone home, screaming for help. Maybe a kitchen worker from the street would stand up for her. But he's not here right now either. And Maria, not knowing what to do, blurted out the first thing that came into her head. "Oh, yes, of course. All I have to do now is close the shift." She overpowered as best she could both the nastiness and the feeling of nausea smile at her abuser and twisted out of his flexible clutches. Now, just a moment, freed, she took a couple wide steps back and quickly headed for the back room. The man shouted after her, "We're waiting for you outside." Disgusted, she laughed. He left the place with his buddies. Maria was finally able to breathe. She huddled in the furthest corner of the back room, leaving James to close up the place and do all the evening formalities. And only an hour later, having made sure with the help of the surveillance camera that the horizon was clear, left her hiding place and hurried home. "Hello. Over." Adriana waved her hand in front of the face of the negligent waitress. "What are you thinking about? Are you ashamed of yourself? I repeat, you are being complained about. You're closer to being fired than ever." Maria, waking up from her long thought, politely replied, "You're talking about those drunks. What didn't they like? They certainly left happy. What are you talking about? This afternoon, they came back disappointed." "Adriana." The voice sounded viciously aggressive. The waitress asked in surprise today. "Who does that?" "This is the first time I've heard of such a thing, to come back with a complaint only the next day." Today, Adriana teased his charge in the nastiest voice possible. It was today that they came to file a complaint. They said our waitress cheated them. What do you say to that? Maria looked up and firmly looked the manager straight in the eye. For the first time in a while, she was ready to fight back against Adriana. "Look, you're on to me now. I have served these people with dignity far better than they deserved. All my own. I performed my duties to the highest standard. But do you really think you have the right to demand that I go with them to the middle of nowhere? That's absurd. My only deception was that I came back from their persistent solicitation of a certain nature. You seriously think that's grounds for dismissal?" Maria's eyes through real lightning. Adriana puffed angrily. "Why did you agree then? Why did you promise? It's irresponsible." Shouted, she suddenly squeaked to the left, as if Maria herself had been deceived in the best expectations. "I was just defending myself that way." He grabbed my arm. I didn't know what else to say or who to turn to for help. Maria thought to herself, "Where were you at that time?" Adriana was embarrassed and looked away. And then a man came from behind. He silently approached the arguing female employees. And it happened that only Maria noticed his presence. Adriana continued to fiercely shove her subordinate. One must work in such a way as to give oneself completely to one's work. Where have you been? I don't concern you anymore. I come and go as I please. I see. At these words, the supervisor standing behind her curved his lip and frowned unhappily. And Maria smiled contentedly at his reaction. But the furious manager simply didn't notice it. She continued, "And here I would go for a walk with them, if it is important for work, that it was difficult for you to spend the evening in the company of men. And now I have to deal with disgruntled customers. I will fire you today, Adriana, your reaction to Maria's perfectly appropriate behavior. I am unpleasantly surprised. The chief's menacing voice behind her back had the effect of a bomb going off. Adriana did not expect such a turn. She almost jumped and turned around sharply. Nick was speaking slowly to her. It is important for our work that the manager of the cafe is always at his workplace. Besides, Maslov has no drunken visitors, and even in such a shameful way. What you propose to perform, Maria, is not exactly our profile, and they shouldn't have been allowed in the establishment at all. You were the one who should have been selecting the guards a week ago. Isn't that what we agreed to at the last meeting? But I can see Maria did just fine without you. I'm thinking more and more often. The chief paused deliberately. Adriana pulled her head into her shoulders and stood as if at bat, waiting for him to continue. More and more often I think that she would have been much better. And the manager finished the chief and looked meaningfully into her eyes. The astonished Adriana opened her mouth and darted her eyes in surprise. Unable to respond to such a tirade, but a few seconds later she just burst into tears. Of course, Maria, you always protect your own. She's the unfortunate one here. She put her fingers to the corner of her eyes, imitating a child's crying. Keep pitying that little chicken. As for me, I'm leaving this rotten hole immediately. She threw the folder with the new menu she was holding and rashly rushed out. Nick frowned in his usual manner and then looked at Maria, who stood, frozen in shock, and grinned. Events seemed to be moving much more quickly than I had anticipated. Oh well, as they say, it's all for the best. The chief left Maria completely bewildered, wondering what would happen next, and retired to his office. Here he sank heavily into his chair, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. He had been thinking for a long time that Adriana should have been fired. In the first place, he suspected that the yard manager was howling for change from the till. And secondly, that horrible temper of hers and the way she behaved with her subordinates. How many good employees had already left who worked with her? Really? Adriana worked at the cafe for years, and at first he was very satisfied with her. The old man thought deeply. Nick could seem any way he wanted: cynical, picky, overly pedantic. But he had never been cruel or unfair to his employees, and his sullen style, his aloofness. In him nurtured one terrible incident that happened in the distant past. In one absolutely not beautiful day, a young and promising businessman lost his entire family in a car accident. The plans to spend a quiet weekend with his wife and 2 children at the country house failed miserably. When Nick received a call from one of his business partners informing him of a sudden change in his business schedule, he had to cancel the trip, and he assured his wife that he would come the next day by train. And they let them not deny themselves the pleasure of warming themselves in the spring sun in close proximity to the bay. So the family went by car without him. Toward lunchtime, he received a call from the emergency services that there had been a terrible accident on the bridge. None of his family survived. His wife and 8-year-old son died on the spot, and his 16-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital the next day. That's how he lost all his loved ones in an instant. Failure has haunted him ever since. A once thriving business languished without the attention of its owner, and an entire chain of successful restaurants was run over by fast food giants. And now at the end of his life, he was just a miserable old man, still unmarried, childless, and disillusioned. All he has left is the small waterfront cafe he was the first to open, a 3-room apartment in the center of Finland, and a long-abandoned house on the shore of the Gulf of Finland. He had already given up hope that he could be happy again. But then, at the very end of last summer, this young shy girl came to him for a job. She reminded him so much of his dead daughter. Nick turned on his computer, opened the video surveillance screens, zoomed in on the central hall, and looked at her closely again. This girl is so fragile and so strong. She too has had her share of suffering in this life, just like him, who himself had lost his parents as a very young child. His father died in the early days of the war, and his mother died of cholera in evacuation. Now it seemed to him that his fate and that of this young girl were somehow connected. Why had she caught his fancy? Maybe it was just senility behind the brackets. But sometimes it seemed to him that this Sorokin had the soul of his dead daughter's smile. His Marinka was smiling the same way. God, he seemed to be going crazy. He stared at the images on the screen again. Maria was taking orders from another customer and chatting cheerfully with them. He smiled involuntarily, looking how haughty she was. At first, the couple relaxedly discussing their choices with her. It's always like that with Maria. It's like she brings out their best qualities in people. It seems that he has finally made this important decision for himself. Nick turned off the computer, stood up and headed downstairs with a firm step. Maria finally had the day off today. She decided to spend it the way she had long ago planned to spend the whole day in bed, cuddling Mars. And now she was lazily lying in a pile of colorful pillows, stroking her big cat, occasionally falling into a shallow, pleasant sleep. She was snapped out of this marvelous pastime by a sudden phone call. It was the chief himself. What could have happened? She quickly answered, frantically jinxed again. Hello, Maria. Good afternoon. No distractions. Pan's calm, slightly husky voice always had a calming effect on her. No, why? Replied the girl, assuming an upright position. Is something wrong? No. What do you mean? Yes. Can you come to work right away? Next week, I'll make up for your lost day off. Oh, well, yeah, sure, Maria said. I'll be right there, Nick. She started packing before she even finished the call. 40 minutes later, Maria rushed to the cafe, confused in her own thoughts. Does he really want to fire me? With apprehension, she thought. I don't think so. He promised to make up for the day off. She walked inside, nodding her head to her coworkers. Passing Emily stopped the girl on the approach to the office of the boss. Why are you here? The waitress asked, surprised. You have the day off today. I don't know myself. Nick called me, said it was urgent. I don't know what to think. Why are you like this? Is something wrong with you? Concerned? I asked Maria. So you don't know yet? Emily raised her eyebrows. Adriana was fired. That's what. Can you imagine? We're all on pins and needles today. Just in shock. She's conspiratorial, lowered her voice. The girls are whispering, saying there's a terrible change coming. Seems our old man's out of his mind and wants to fire everyone. I think he's closing down his business. Or something like that, I don't know exactly, but there's definitely something going on. She grinned nervously. Well, we don't know that for sure. I'm afraid he's called you in to fire you too. The law says you have to give them 2 weeks' notice. Too bad we just became friends, she said in a high-pitched voice. All right, well, good luck. I'm off. In the meantime, she fluttered down like a frightened bird. Maria panicked. His knees shook, and his mouth instantly went dry. Having failed to regain at least a semblance of calm, she timidly knocked and entered the chief's office. Nick, hello again. Hello, Maria. He said it a little too sweetly. Surely now he will say that he is sorry, but he has to fire me. Maria's mind raced. She tried to restrain herself, but all the emotions were reflected on her sensual face. You don't look so good today, do you? I must have pulled you out for nothing. My bad, Nick said. He made her even more upset. Here's what I wanted to do. He sighed. Maria, tell me, do you like working? Maria felt as if the ground had gone from under her feet. She turned even more pale and visibly nervous and replied yes, very much. It's my best job. I am interested in the food service industry and me. I am just happy to work for you. The cafe owner smiled. That's a good thing. But I guess you wouldn't want to work all your life as a waitress, right? There are other opportunities in life. Maria didn't know what to say to that. She was ready to fall to her knees, cry, do anything to keep him from firing her. No, I don't want to leave. Please, I'll work as long as I have to. Don't fire me. The girl blurted out in her heart and cried. The old man's thick gray eyebrows crept upward. Maria, what are you saying? I didn't mean to. What made you think that? He rose from his seat. All right, it doesn't matter. But don't cry, don't cry. He awkwardly stroked her shoulder. Anyway, in a nutshell, Adriana doesn't work for us anymore. So I'm going to offer the position to you. How do you feel about that? Maria pulled her tearful eyes out. I don't know what to say. She just couldn't believe what was happening to her simple waitress and the position. "I'm the manager." "Thank you. Of course I'm in. I'm so glad." She wanted to throw herself at the old man's neck, but she was just in time to be yanked out of the chain of command. "Oh, great." Chief, with a loud clap of his hands. "I know you're already aware of your future duties. I've seen you watching Adriana closely, flipping through magazines, trying to do many things for her when she's away, and all the other things you've done for my establishment. I'm very grateful. I can't talk pretty, though. You're welcome. Let's go." And the old man grabbed her arm with determination. The whole team has been warned in advance by their boss, already gathered in the kitchen of the cafe for such news, which he was about to tell his employees. He even told them to close the establishment for an hour. Unprecedented business. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The chef has raised his hand in the air. "I'd like to introduce you to our new manager." He paused for a moment. "You all undoubtedly know this man well by now." He looked around at all his employees, including Maria, who stood modestly next to her colleagues. "Maria, please." The host nodded to Maria with a gesture indicating that she should step forward. The waitresses, cooks, and bartenders looked at each other in amazement, and none of them could utter a word. Suddenly, Molly, standing behind everyone, stepped forward. "Congratulations," she said with a slight irony, looking at Maria, as if she were seeing her for the first time. "We had no doubt you'd be the one to get the top job." "Well, it's an interesting choice, especially considering that you've been working here for less than a week." Nick gave his ward a stern look. "Molly, you're not happy with my decision." "Yes and no." Nick, not the least bit embarrassed, she replied and looked fearlessly into the eyes of her boss. "I hope you won't regret your choice." Then Emily gave her high-pitched voice. "Maria, what a good girl you are." "Congratulations." She smiled radiantly at her new boss, but in her voice you could hear unconcealed envy. And Maria smiled indignantly. Now her employees were already congratulating her. She answered them mechanically, but she did not feel any joy. She understood perfectly well now that she would have to replace Adriana, who had been fired. It would not get any easier. "I think they all hate me now," she thought wistfully. And so the new position came out, adding Maria and new problems. Even those who used to be on good or neutral terms with her started treating her completely differently. She was definitely envied. There were murmurs behind her back. She was discussed behind her eyes. But no one said anything in the open. And what could they say? Maria had earned her position in a completely honest and correct way. And they had nothing to reproach her with. Now she had more work, but her salary became even higher, and she could afford something she had never dreamed of before. She could, but did not allow money, continued to save, dreaming of the time when she could put them in real business. Thus, everything went its way. On one of the most ordinary working days, Maria was finishing preparations for a big banquet. One of the local rich men had rented the whole cafe for the whole day, having decided to celebrate his girlfriend's birthday in a big way, so to speak. Maria prepared everything perfectly, as always. All the requirements of the customer were fulfilled. And now she was already sitting in her corner near the bar, watching from there how the planned banquet was going on. Well, rich people know how to party hard. She reasoned with mixed feelings, and had just reached for her cup of coffee, which was slowly being pulled up and in the process, when one of the newly hired new waitresses ran up to her. "Maria Pipsqueak," blurted out a young girl named Lyda. "Is that your name there? Why do you have to say that all the time?" Maria wrinkled his nose. What else happened there? Lyda guiltily lowered her eyes. "Aya, I accidentally doused a client with champagne." "Please forgive me, I really did, accidentally." Maria sighed heavily. "Well, okay, I understand. But please be more careful from now on." Lyda smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Maria. I'll do my best." Maria counted to 3 and headed in the direction of the disgruntled customer. Figuring out who was who, the victim was quite easy. It turned out to be a young and very handsome man in a white shirt absolutely wet with champagne. His face was skewed by a disgruntled grimace, and his hair emphasized his dark and shiny eyes. Maria suddenly caught herself thinking that she liked him. She restrained herself. She found time and approached the young man. "Good evening. I'm Maria's manager. We have already met when you ordered a banquet from us. You wanted to see me?" The young man's stern look softened when he saw the manager, and Maria smiled broadly. "Why don't you watch your waiters? Look what that girl has done." He spread his arms wide, pointing to a large wet champagne stain. "Oh, if you'll excuse us. She's just had a nervous breakdown at work recently. The result: as a compliment, please accept a small gift from our establishment." Maria turned around and made a sign to the waitress behind her. And she, smiling dazzlingly, served a bottle of the best champagne in buckets with ice. Maria smiled too. "We will replace the waiter, of course. The girl will be interviewed and punished accordingly. I guarantee it." The young man hummed in response. "All right, have it your way." He leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head. "I'll have a new shirt delivered right away. In the meantime, let's go out in the yard for a smoke. There we'll discuss how to correct this oversight." He suddenly winked playfully at Maria. "I do not smoke, but I would love to breathe fresh air with you. A couple of minutes." Maria smiled politely, reminding herself mentally that the customer is always right, especially the one who rents all establishments for an expensive party. Barely the young people were in the fresh air. The guy lazily and defiantly reached out to spread his arms in different directions. Once he, as a zealous horse, led wide nostrils, greedily gaining air into his lungs, and took out of his pants pocket an expensive cigarette case. Maria shuffled modestly from foot to foot. It was slightly awkward for her to watch him, being so close. She was the first to start the conversation. You wanted to talk about something, didn't you? Can I get you something else instead of champagne?" The guy smoked a cigarette and exhaled a puff of smoke right in the girl's face. From the clear smell, she was getting angry, and he laughed. "Excuse me, Maria, but how about this option? I generously forgive you the ruined shirt, and you, in turn, go on a date with me." He waited, looked at the girl. Maria, on her cheek, became words of embarrassment. She lowered her eyes and kicked with the toe of her shoe. A tiny pebble lying nearby. "Wait, you rented our cafe to celebrate your girlfriend's birthday, right? Didn't you?" Your girlfriend's last words were deliberately emphasized. The guy laughed even harder and took a step in her direction. "So what?" He fixed a strand of her hair in a masterly manner. "By the way, I liked you right away. Of course I remembered you." Maria was visibly nervous. She tried to find the right words, but he beat her to it. So, lowering his deep velvet voice, he took her hand in his large warm palm. "You're going to be my girlfriend." Turning Maria's pink palm, he kissed her dusty one lightly on the side, while looking intently into Maria's eyes. And here our Maria melted like ice cream taken out of the freezer and forgotten in the kitchen. Even when ordering the banquet, she noted the attractive beauty of this guy, his brutal masculinity. Rough and risky, but very attractive features of his tanned face. Maria seemed to float on the wave of her feeling. In a flash, he pulled himself back and mentally scolded himself for such nasty thoughts. His girlfriend is the one she's waiting for. It's her birthday today, and I'm disgusted with myself. She took a step back and said confidently, "No, you can't do that. After all, you already have a girlfriend, don't you?" The guy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "So what?" "She will understand everything perfectly well for her. Don't worry." He held out his hand to Maria on Italy. "And I understand you already have a boyfriend. Or are you married at all? That's not an obstacle either, by the way." He stared into her eyes again, and then suddenly pulled her to him and gave her a long, demanding kiss on the lips. Maria felt the ground fall away from under her feet. The last time she had experienced such a pinching feeling was a long time ago. She had been about 16 then. She made an effort to pull away from her vis-a-vis. "Lori, you're wasting it." She stammered, unable to find what else to say to him. But after a short interval, added almost with despair, "It's just all wrong." Lori hummed, pushing the corners of his lips down. Grinning, he looked at Maria with a new appraising gaze. "Look, have you ever even had a boyfriend?" Maria was embarrassed. Well, no, she was especially embarrassed for the rule of taking her hair behind her ear. Why? Lori's eyes rounded in amazement. He seemed to be in complete shock. Are you serious? I mean, never ever. In every sense. Maria, unable to contain her smile, giggled softly. Yes, you got it right. Never. In every sense. Well, you give him a ruse. The young man whistled. All right, I'll forgive you. I mean for the ruined shirt. He squeezed the cigarette butt between his index finger and thumb and deftly thumbed it forward into the darkness. A jerk. Olenka's waiting for me. He smiled again, showing perfectly straight white teeth, and disappeared behind the doors. Left alone, Maria took a deep breath, gathering her courage to return to the banquet hall. When she stepped inside, she found Lori already cradling the birthday girl to his chest. Maria was pricked by some new feeling she had never experienced before. Was it jealousy? She began to berate herself again in her own thoughts. Fool. What a fool you are. Suddenly, the ubiquitous Emily appeared from behind. Who's handsome? And he's loaded. Too bad he's busy. Dreamily said the waitress. Maria jumped on the spot from surprise. Emily, why scare her like that? Emily, ignoring the question, continued to admire Lori. No, look at him. Not a man, but a dream. Oh, do you know who he is? No, who is he? Maria inquired. He's the son of one of our deputies. He's terribly rich. He seems to be out of politics, but he has a lot of money. She rolled her eyes in delight. Oh, come on, he's just some idiot. Maria suddenly blurted out. Intrigued by her friend's new look, she, without waiting for her to ask a logical question, told her what had just happened in the courtyard. And I whistled in annoyance. You're so full of it. You've gone off the deep end, haven't you? I should have said yes. No way. Maria said yes. She turned around and headed towards the kitchen. Emily from behind the family followed her, making her endless judgments. Since the day of that ill-fated banquet, several days passed, and Maria finally had a chance to take that extra day off, which the chief had offered her the day he pulled her off the couch by appointing her manager. That time, Maria decided not to lie around, to do a lot of things that had been piling up for a long time. Maria, hi. How was your weekend? On the first day of the week, she was immediately greeted by Nick. Hello, I'm fine, thank you. Went to the new store. What did they open? I just bought my cat a new house. She's got a big smile on her face, spreading her arms wide. It's huge, and it cost more than my apartment. The girl laughed resoundingly. Nick laughed back of those cats. I have a kitty at home too. Butterscotch is so cool. It's horrible. And what is the name of your cat, Barsic? Maria smiled. I found him a few years ago at the store, all sick and beggarly. It hurts to remember. The desire to help a poor stray is very commendable. I'm glad my manager has such a bright soul. I never doubted it. Maria was embarrassed by the compliment. She was even a little embarrassed. Why did her boss praise her so much? She all tensed up, preparing for what is about to say, old man, I wanted to discuss with you. There's 2 questions. 1, remember when you found those good suppliers? Well, with the meat, I lost their contacts. Maria exhaled and with relief took out her smartphone and dictated the right phone number and asked, and the second question. The old man was suddenly embarrassed. Maria first saw him like this. He walked around his office and sat down on the edge of the table, stroking his fluffy mustache. The second question, girl, you must have noticed that some of our employees, how to say it, dislike you. Maria lowered her head as if she was guilty. Yes, I have noticed. I don't know how I can change that. Forgive me. The old man rolled his eyes. Maria, I don't like your kindness, honestly. But in some moments you have to be tougher, bolder, persistent, if you will. For instance, remember when Molly asked you to fill in for her? I remember, it was a few weeks ago, the girl answered. I can literally feel it in my bones. Okay, but first of all, you're not a waitress anymore. You shouldn't be filling in for waiters, you know. Of course not. But her sister was sick at the time. I couldn't fill in for her. I couldn't help Molly out. She needed to support her sister. Nick laughed sadly dearly. Dinah doesn't have any sister. And there was another incident. Not too long ago, she sent some friends of hers on your shift. You literally worked the last week before your new assignment. Yes, the old man moved his lips to calculate the date and nodded his head, confirming his thoughts. Well, they came to me personally and praised you, calling you a terrible worker. Well, I know you're not. And I've seen these guys in the company of these guys. More than once, Molly realized they were acquaintances of hers. You see where I'm going with this? Maria raised her head, trying to push away the tears, and quietly replied, I see. I am too trusting. Sullenly, she summarized. Yes, nodded the old man. But it's not bad at all, and you are not to blame just in our collective. And in general in life, you have to be a little tougher, even more cynical, you know? People, unfortunately, most of them are not as soft and fluffy as we would like them to be. Anyway, just be on your guard, sweetie. I will. Maria smiled gratefully at her boss. I got it. I'll do my best. Thank you for the advice. Well, I'll be off. I have a lot of work to do, of course. Go on. The old man sat down at his desk again, pulling out some papers from his drawers. Maria went out into the hall and almost crashed into the elite. A young waitress ran with all her legs. Maria, Maria, I'm just looking for the goalkeeper panting and the girl there asking for you go quickly. Who? Maria asked with a sigh, suspecting that again came disgruntled visitors, but she followed Lyda's gaze and marveled next to the bar stood Laurie himself and smiled at her with a full mouth and held a lush bouquet of scarlet roses. Noticing the girl's gaze, he waved to her. Maria, how glad I am to see you. Theatrically, he said and bowed slightly, standing next to her. Lyda jumped a little on the spot. Unable to hide her emotions, she quietly. Maria, how lucky are you? How do I envy you? I'm at work for everyone. Maria suddenly barked at her Maria and the impressionable Lyda. Dumbfounded, she had never heard the always kind and helpful manager snapped at her like that before. Laurie from Bolivia laughed when he saw the scene, and then came closer and held out a bouquet to Maria. And this is for you. We can talk. Maria preferred to retreat again to the patio away from prying eyes and ears, and nodded to him in agreement. Outside, Laurie was at it again. Well, he switched from heels to toes, and I broke up with Alina. He broke the big news. Now you're ready to go out with me. What do you mean you broke up? Is that because of me? Maria looked at the guy with such hope that he couldn't help smiling. Who else would Queen Victoria be for? You, of course. So you're ready to go on a date with me? Maria repeated his words, running my mind over my prospects. Laurie is richly handsome, successful, and really likes her. Isn't that a real fairy tale? She feverishly pondered over the information she had received. He broke up with her because of me. It's just like in the novels. She smiled at her own thoughts, but another, more down-to-earth one immediately popped into her head. If he broke up with her so easily, with that glamorous beauty, won't he break up with me just as easily? Joyful light immediately went out in Maria's green eyes, which did not go unnoticed by Laurie. Maria, why do you even want to? He was genuinely surprised. Well, I don't even know. It was so sudden and quick, she answered, and in her mind recalled the recent dialogue with her boss, always be on guard. She remembered Nick's words that the guy laughed, showing off his dazzling teeth quickly. How did you want it to be? When is it okay to ask you out on a date? After a year of dating? Oh, stop it already. It's just a meeting. A walk. Call it what you want. If you don't like it, just walk away. Here Maria, though doubting the rightness of her choice, gave up. Feelings and emotions outweighed. After all, this man was so beautiful and so attractive, and reason can wait. After all, she wouldn't have to live alone forever. She gave him a flirtatious smile and nodded. All right then. Laurie smiled victoriously. Great. What time do you finish everything? I'll pick you up. Ciao. He gave her a casual peck on the cheek, waved, and left. She didn't have time to dress up properly, so she quickly ordered from the marketplace the first dress that caught her eye. And in an hour, the courier brought a couple of sizes to choose from. Arriving by 7 o'clock, Laurie whistled and raised one eyebrow when he saw her in the outfit. Look, you look shocked, shocked. Maria smiled and blushed lol at the compliment she received. She was very pleased with his praise. Lori sat her on the front passenger seat of his luxurious sports car, closed the door, and himself literally jumped behind the wheel. The car made a noise like a beast and in 1 second took off from the place. Maria literally squeezed into the back of the seat. Well, as a satisfied Lori looked at her slightly mockingly. She didn't. No, it's fine, Maria assured him. But all she could think about at that moment was how they could avoid an accident at such a breakneck speed. Lori hummed contentedly and gave the car a little more gas. How did they get to the restaurant? She remembered very vaguely. In the dense traffic his low car was maneuvering, so that the lights of street lamps and headlights of oncoming cars merged before her eyes into glittering ribbons. At one point, she even covered her eyes so that she couldn't see at all. But Lori didn't care, and now he was opening the car door for her. Get out. What are you sitting there for? Maria gave him her cold, thin hand and awkwardly stepped out of the car. Is she really across town by the bay? Oh, there's that expensive, famous restaurant. Oh, come on. Her head was spinning and her legs were showing. If he always drives like that, and she wouldn't go with him again. But Lori took her exclamation as a compliment and literally inflated himself with pride. Although Maggiana beast of a driver laughter, but he and let her, taking her under the arm on the marble slippery steps. It turned out to be simply gorgeous inside. They went up to the second-floor lounge, which had a marvelous view of the bay and the lights of the evening city. The privacy and the table by the window was served with such skill that Maria admired the art of the staff working here and began to look at every detail to memorize and try to do the same in their cafe. Of course, she and the chef could not reach such a level. It requires huge investments, but some things can be repeated. Where are you flying, Maria? What are you ordering? Lori's voice brought her back to reality. A smiling schoolgirl waitress in a beautiful uniform with the establishment's logo was already standing next to her. I recommend our chef's specialty. What's your shampoo? Let's start with the fire. Lori reclined in a soft armchair and smiled indulgently. Well, perhaps bring us my plan. And if there is, of course, said Maria politely, having studied the map and Godfather wines, of course, right away. The waitress nodded. An excellent choice to start a romantic evening. And you're quite a good judge. Lori smiled approvingly. I didn't expect that. It's my job, Maria answered him modestly, sitting here in this posh room. She still couldn't believe that such a man had paid attention to her, a simple girl who had grown up in an orphanage, a girl with no education, no glamorous gloss, no model looks. She had always tended to underestimate herself from time to time, even slowly exhausted her self-lock ear. When Lori did not see to make sure that everything happening to her was not a wonderful and marvelous dream, that everything was real. And here she is, yesterday's orphanage graduate, a girl who's a nobody, sitting here in a fancy, expensive dress in front of the man of her dreams. How can you believe that? And Lori wiped his lips with a napkin. How was dinner? Did you enjoy it? Yes, Maria smiled very much. Thank you for this evening. I have to admit, honestly, this is my first real date. Oh, come on. Lori laughed quietly, shaking his head. And where did you come from? Maria? The girl only shrugged enigmatically. She wasn't going to tell him everything about herself at once. Lori gestured to the waitress to bring the bill. So what are our plans next? Are we going to my place or to a hotel? Maria turned pale and was not on a joke afraid that no. Lori grinned predatorily somehow. No, what's wrong again? Without looking at the bill, he brought the phone to the portable payment terminal and carelessly threw a couple of withdrawn bills on the table as a tip. Maria, how stupid is that? I've already broken up with my girlfriend, like you wanted. What more do you want? Maria got up from the table after him. I don't want anything. I won't sleep with a man until I'm married. It's my principle, if you will. And I won't cheat on him. She took a small black loaf in her hands and already headed for the exit from the restaurant. But Lori caught up with her in 2 jumps and pulled her sharply to him. What are you doing, silly? He kissed her neck and ran his hand down her smooth and open back. Don't be silly. Let's go. I'm not going to hurt you. Everything inside Maria turned upside down, too, from his closeness, his scent, and his hot breath. But she found the strength to pull the insolent man's hands away from her. "No, Lori, I'm not going anywhere." "I'm sorry to waste your time," she pondered, searching for the right words. "Please understand, I just can't. Besides, I have a cat at home alone." She threw one last belittling glance at the young man and literally ran downstairs to duck through the saving door of the women's restroom. Here she took a breath, refreshed, and ordered a cab. Puzzled, Lori remained standing by the stairs. "So she has the cat all to herself," he hummed and suddenly laughed loudly. Maria returned home, flooding and bitter tears. She was in pain, hurt that Lori had mistaken her for such an available doormat. She threw off her annoying, stiff shoes and was in her bed in a flash, burying her face in her pillow. All morning she'd been tearing up all morning, choking on resentment, not giving her time to recover. She grabbed herself by the hair. "What's wrong with me?" She really didn't understand why Lori was acting this way at the master's cries muffled by the pillow. A concerned Mars came over, pulled in next to her, and snuggled his muzzle against her cheek and fell silent. "You're the only one who loves me." "Maria." Wiping away her tears, the girl said. She fell asleep in a luxurious dress in the arms of her favorite cat. The next day, intrigued and friends, time and again asked Maria how her date went. Natalia waved off their annoying queries. She had not the slightest desire to discuss Lori, especially since he never showed up again. And he hadn't even called back to see how she'd gotten home. It wasn't love. I summarized the results of the failed date. Maria, and forbade herself to even think about this rich bastard. In recent days, Maria spent more and more time with the chief. He paid a lot of attention to the training of his new manager. They also drank coffee together, tasting new dishes to decide whether to introduce them to the menu or not. Just chatting, discussing their favorites, strategizing about advertising and other working points. Today, Maria was coloring in Nick's colors about her next idea. Suddenly, there was an insistent knock on the office door, and without waiting for an answer, Emily unceremoniously stuck her pretty face in the open door. Maria stretched out the waitress, trying to observe business etiquette. "It's like that in there. You won't believe it." She couldn't stand it. She habitually switched to the first name. What? What happened?" The manager got up from her seat. "What happened again?" "I'm worried." "There's your boyfriend again." She giggled happily and said that yes, go and see for yourself. From impatience, she has already completely leaked into the office of the chief and pulled Maria. "The girls and I are shocked. You do not even think to not be a fool and better agree." Considered all the way up the stairs as a waitress who understands nothing, Maria. "Jan, stop please," she begged at last. "What should I agree with?" "Oh, now you'll see for yourself," delightedly giggled Emily and literally pushed her into the hall. Seeing what was happening there, Maria involuntarily shrieked quietly in the middle of the room. Lori stood there in a light-colored suit without embarrassing the numerous customers. Next to him was a huge basket filled with an unimaginable variety of flowers. Behind, along one of the walls, was a small orchestra. Seeing Maria, Lori waved his hand and the musicians played an enchanting melody, and he went up to her and got down on one knee. In his outstretched hand was a red velvet box. "Maria, my dear, I thought about what you said. You are absolutely right that someone like you cannot be taken lightly, so I've made a decision." In one fell swoop, he opened the box and inside glittered a ring with an impressive stone. "Will you marry me?" Sneakily, he asked. Maria froze like an ancient statue, or an enchanted princess from a fairy tale, on whom an evil sorceress has cast her terrible spell. Almost all of the available staff had already piled around, and even some of the visitors from the kitchen were interestedly peeking in, the technicians and cooks. All of them were hungry for more than just bread and spectacle. The people froze, just like Maria herself, waiting for her answer. "Maya, I don't know. I'll wait now, please." She suddenly blurted out and rashly rushed back up the stairs. "Nick." In desperation, screamed Maria, burst into the familiar office. "Nick, you're the only one. Can you help me now?" "What the hell happened?" My God. The owner was alarmed and got out from behind the desk. "What is it?" He put a trembling arm around the girl's shoulders and gazed into her face. "What's the matter with you?" "He brought the ring," Maria said in a trembling voice. "Who is this rich bastard?" "Yes, he proposed to me." "Now he's still waiting there. Please, I beg you, tell me, what should I do?" "I have no one else." And Maria burst into tears, burying her face in the old man's shoulder. "Come on, my little girl. I'm touched." The chief stroked her head with his rough palm and coaxed her. "You did right to come for advice, didn't you? I've lived my life, I've seen a lot. I can see right through people like that Lori of yours." He lifted her face by the chin. "You shouldn't agree," he said firmly and frowned his bones and eyebrows. "Otherwise, you might regret it bitterly later." Changed beyond recognition. He spoke with such trepidation in his voice, with such evidently audible and sadness, as if he were instructing his own child. "Now go and take your fate in your hands and think hard about your decision. Don't chop off your shoulder," he told her lastly. Maria felt dizzy and her eyes darkened. For a second, it seemed to her that two different beings were sitting on either side of her shoulders, each whispering advice to her. One of them was saying, "Of course, go for it, you fool. Such a chance falls once in a lifetime to let you go, and you'll never meet such a man again." And the other soberly said, "Do not jump into the maelstrom with his head. If he really loves you, he will understand everything and wait until you are ready." And here she stands again, in front of him, already visibly nervous. What did she present? He laughed, trying to hide his disappointment after her flight. "So what do you say to me? Darling, I love you and I want you to be my wife. What else do I have to do to get you to say yes?" I said it quietly. I think she saw with her eyes. The hall, frozen in anticipation. Then she looked into Lori's eyes. In them she saw what she wanted to see: boundless love, expectation, hope. "Of course I agree," said someone suddenly, as if from beside her, as if in her place. And she herself had not yet had time to realize anything, as all around shouted yea. "Itter," and a small orchestra played some bravura music. The hall simply exploded with applause. Visitors and employees smiled and congratulated the lovers. And already she has a huge ring on her finger. Lori hugs her by the shoulders, kisses her on the lips in front of everyone, and only crashed into memory unpleasant dissonance. A maliciously unpleasant stare, a day apart from that first kiss that happened on the patio. That public kiss and the shocking engagement that followed was only the third in her life. The very first, it had happened as a teenager in Maria's native orphanage. Mike, her young lover, was a peer and classmate of the girls. When did they realize they liked each other? They were both 16 years old. Teenagers were shy for a long time. But one day, burning interest and sincere feelings outweighed, and hiding somewhere in the background, the guys kissed for the first time. And then their relationship failed to fully develop. Mike left the orphanage a couple weeks after that kiss. Unlike Maria, the guy had parents, but at some point they were deprived of parental rights. And it was in that period of time when lonely and vulnerable Maria found, as it seemed to her, her man in this world. Mike was taken from the orphanage by some distant relatives, having formalized the guardianship more. Maria had never heard anything about her lover, so Lori was not her first love in the classic sense of the term. But he managed somehow to find a sensitive string in her soul kissing him, as far as she was able to analyze it, already being alone with herself. It couldn't compare to that kiss from her distant youth, but it was more confident and mature. He was a real man, the kind of man she would be like a stone wall behind. At least that's how it seemed to her. And then, in the cafe, after that unforgettable scene with the proposal and the ring, Lori suddenly pulled out some papers. "Look," he said proudly, "I knew you'd say yes. So I took the liberty and already prepared the documents for our marriage. All you have to do is to sign. The rest is up to me." He lowered his voice. "You see, I've used my connections, and we won't have to wait. We can get married tomorrow." "Well, what kind of wedding do you want?" Maria's hands shook. She scrutinized the groom so quickly. "What for? We hardly know each other. Why are you in such a hurry?" Lori frowned unhappily. I'm in a hurry. You're doing it again. I love you and I want you to be my wife. Is that a bad thing? He lowered his head, eliminating his gaze to the perfect, patent leather shoes. Well, you know, if it's a rush for you, you might as well say no. I thought you loved me too, and you don't. Sharp shouted Maria. She was immediately embarrassed by her excessive emotionality. I looked at her with attentive and sad eyes. Nick looked at her, standing in the corner of the hall. She turned back to her lover. I mean, I love you too. I just didn't expect it to be like this. The guy smiled again. What do you mean, sweetheart? I'm trying especially for you. He shoved the paper into the girl's hands and took out a gold-plated Parker from his pocket. Go ahead, sign it. Maria frowned slightly. Read the document. Lori was not deceived. It was indeed an application for the registry office. She carefully studied everything written. Then she asked in surprise, how did you get all my information? Lori winked cheerfully at the girl. The power of love. Maria smiled weakly at him. She had already put her hand to sign, but something stopped her. The girl thought about it, and the recent words of the boss came to her mind again. She twirled the pen in her hands. And yet he signed it. This is fate. This is true love. She convinced herself, chasing away the tedium and thought. Lori seemed to melt. I love you. He shouted out again, drawing the attention of those around him. But I have to go now. He folded the signed sheet neatly into a folder. I'm going to do the paperwork right now. And you know what I propose to celebrate our wedding right here. How does that sound? He spread his arms out like he wanted to cover the whole small room. What do you think? Maria smiled gently. Let's make the arrangements then. And from me, the payment and everything else. He hugged the girl one last time and disappeared through the doors of the cafe. Nick came to Maria immediately. He had a look of concern on his face. Maria, what did you just sign? Anxious? Asked the old man. It's an application to the registry office. Very soon we will get married. Trying to make her voice proud, the girl replied. Nick frowned even more, and his eyebrows, judging by the expression on his face, it would seem that something terrible had happened. He dragged Maria to his office and said to Maria sternly, What if it's not for the registry office? What if he cheats you? Steal it. What if he uses your signature and takes over the loan? Maria laughed. Nick, what loan? You know Lori comes from the richest family in our town. And I'm begging you, what is there to steal from me? Well, think about it. The old man squinted. You can steal from a man without even taking a single dollar from him. I hope you don't have to face that. Oh, with a gesture he signaled that their conversation was over. Maria thanked him politely and left with a slight shrug. And he wondered. Indeed, he knew the Lori family well. These people had never needed money in their lives. On the contrary, they were so rich that they could afford almost anything. But still, something was definitely amiss. But what was it? Soon Maria was drowning in the hustle and bustle of the wedding, forgetting everything. She carefully picked out everything that even indirectly related to this wedding, her wedding. She couldn't quite believe how lucky she was to have Lori, and she had been picky about the flowers. She sat for hours studying the festive menu and even the color of the napkins. Maria agonized for several long and tedious hours. She wanted everything to be beautiful, unforgettable, perfect. Although the guest list was quite modest, it was mostly Lori's friends. Maria didn't have anyone to invite. The main guest of the girl was her boss, Nick. Obviously, he was not delighted with this wedding, but of course he did not refuse the invitation. Maria endlessly respected and even loved this hot old man. After all, it was he who gave the girl everything she had now. After all, it was thanks to him that Maria met her future husband. A few days before the wedding, another unpleasant circumstance came to light. The parents of the groom will not be able to come to the wedding because he is away abroad and they have some urgent business there. Maria, of course, was upset by the news, but did not let it show. Besides, Lori promised her a family feast after the honeymoon. Trust me, baby, you won't lose much by not seeing my old people at the registry office. On the big day itself, Maria expected another surprise Lori arranged so that the registry office and the registrar is solid. Solemn Lady came to them herself, and the whole wedding took place within the walls of the cafe. It turns out that this service is called off-site registration. Maria quickly looked on the internet. Really exists such a thing. As for her herself, she prepared everything just fine. The hall was decorated with white and lilac flowers. The main color of the holiday she chose lavender. Having decorated everything in delicate bed colors, Lori's friends turned out to be expectedly peculiar. All as one were incredibly glamorous and rich and powerful people. They peered at the cafe meticulously, but apparently out of politeness, without saying a single word. But their gazes were definitely filled with dislike and arrogance. Maria tried not to pay attention to such trifles. Nothing on this day could spoil her joy and happiness. Even the disgruntled looks of the groom's guests, waitresses, and banquet attendants were divided into two camps. Some were happy for Maria, cheering her up and complimenting her gorgeous white dress and great hairstyle. Others never managed to hide either their dislike or their obvious envy. From Maria's side, as bridesmaids acted Emily and Lita on the ruffled Condi dresses. And when the newlyweds exchanged rings, even the most disgruntled could not hide their joyful smiles. And Nick himself did not hold back a single tear. He saw how happy Maria was, saw with what awe and with what love her newfound husband treated her. I must have been wrong. The cafe owner thought to himself, love catches up with people sometimes in the most unexpected places. And isn't my Maria the most beautiful girl in this world? Right after the newlyweds' dance, a tall and statuesque girl approached them. She looked to be about 30. She was dressed in a gorgeous black silk dress. Her lustrous hair was beautifully scattered down her back. "Lori, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Why?" With a smirk, asked the guy without releasing his young spouse from his embrace. "Put it this way, I have nothing to hide from my wife." And he laughed merrily, looking Maria in the eyes. Maria was embarrassed. "Well, if it's something important?" "No," said Lori. The girl who approached them pressed her lips together with a long and attentive look, looked into his eyes, and then said, "Okay, I will tell Lori. Please, think properly about your married life." She chose her words carefully, and Maria realized that there was nothing this pretty girl could say directly. You know, living people are not toys that can be used and thrown away for uselessness. She finished mysteriously, shook her head, and walked away. Maria was wary, but Lori laughed merrily. "She's just jealous, chasing after me. And you and I have to go to the hotel." He looked at her with a look that was bashful and modest. "What about the guests?" almost pitifully asked Maria. "What about the guests?" objected the man. "They are having fun without us. And they are waiting for us." He whispered something in her ear, and Maria giggled shamefully, lowering her eyes into the bright sun. And Maria wanted to jump up immediately. After all, the first thought that came to her mind was about work, and that she had overslept. But immediately she remembered yesterday's wedding. Then last night. Without opening her eyes, she smiled sweetly stretched and found no one around. Alarmed, Maria climbed up on the bed, looking around. Lori was nowhere to be found. She looked the room, quietly called to her favorite, but there was no answer. Then she carefully got up, returned to the sheet, and went in search of her husband. For the room was simply huge, but in the living room and in the bathroom he was not there either. The young wife's heart was pricked by some unpleasant feeling, a hunch. But Maria quickly dismissed the silly suspicion, thinking that Lori might well have gone away, for example, for work. As it was, on the coffee table she noticed a small leaf, and on it was written her favorite. "Good morning to me. Urgent to leave. Important business. I'll meet you later at lunchtime at your cafe. Love kisses all your." You know, she read the note and smiled at the memory, and blushed again. At the cafe, her appearance created quite a sensation. Everyone congratulated her again. The girls giggled and asked questions, and Molly was the only one who asked coldly, "Why isn't she in the Maldives yet?" Maria answered her with a contemptuous smile and promised herself to fire the bitch at the first opportunity. Then she checked her current affairs, drank coffee, and couldn't find anything else to do. Today, she was being replaced by Emily, whom she had been grooming for the position of her deputy for a long time. After all, life as a married woman involves all sorts of unexpected twists and turns. Maria smiled again at her thoughts. Yes, she was definitely ready for any twists and turns. And this joyful feeling gave her new hope. Toward lunchtime, Maria began to worry. Lori still hadn't written anything. She was too shy to write or call, in case she distracted him from important matters. Several hours passed, and when the sun began to sink, Maria began to panic. Lori still hadn't shown up. Maybe something had happened to him. Nervous, she tried to call her husband, but he didn't answer the incoming call. The young wife's hands were shaking with fear for her spouse, and in her thoughts various horrors began to loom. Then the front door of the cafe opened abruptly. Lori appeared in the doorway, surrounded by a group of his friends. Maria was happy. "Jesus, where have you been?" "You're all right." She rushed toward him, but stopped abruptly halfway. Standing next to him on his right hand was the very girl he had dated before Maria. It was her birthday that the company of rich men had celebrated at this cafe. It was at her birthday party that Maria had met Lori. She froze in place, trying to figure out what it all meant. The rarefied company didn't seem the least bit complex. Quickly seated at a vacant table, it looked like all of them, including Lori, were already tipsy. The former Lori asked Maria with a chuckle, "Well, young ear, would you like to offer your husband's guests a table?" and laughed loudly, tipping her head back. Lori laughed with her. Maria was shocked. Again, all eyes were on her. But now a burning sense of shame flooded the purple color, her face. But she overpowered herself and came closer. "Darling, what is the meaning of all this?" She tried to take his hand, but he yanked it away and smirked. "It means that you, Marusha, are an idiot." He said those cruel words as loudly as possible. The people around them fell silent for a moment, listening to the conversation between the newly married couple. "Which means I've got a bet on you," he shouted again. "Lori, stop it. What are you saying?" Maria replied in tears. "Let's get out of here. Let's talk in private." "No, let everyone know what a knave fool you are." And the guy volleyed in a glass of whiskey and went to the center of the hall. "Listen up, everybody," he yelled, smirking. "And I bet a tidy sum that I could put this one down. Didn't touch it in bed." In a drunken frenzy, he broadcast to the crowd. "Have you ever seen a nun like her? You'd be hard-pressed to find one. I lied to her about breaking up with my girlfriend, and she wouldn't let it go. I took her to Puppy's, expensive restaurants. I had to cheat anyway. I forged documents and everything so that the stupid orphan would think that I really married her. Of course, that wedding was a farce of a fake. There's no way I'm marrying someone like you. A practical joke. What did you imagine?" He gave Maria a scornful look. "I'm not going to get married at all. I just had to win that bet. That's all. And now you've served us like a restaurant's doormat. Because you are a doormat now. Imagination sucks. Come on," he insisted, coming almost right up to me. "Come on. Or have you forgotten how you did it last night?" Smiled, looking unhappy straight in the eyes, and she was already shaking all over and tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. She opened her mouth to answer, as suddenly there was some kind of a clap, and all the visitors in a panic began to scatter. Where to? Leaving their belongings lying unattended. In the center of the hall was suddenly Nick himself, and he had a hunting okut in his hands. Lori's company, momentarily oblivious to the fun, poured out of the room in the front rows, abandoning their leader, subordinates hiding in corners. In a few minutes, only Lori and Maria remained in the center of the room. After the first shot in the air, he hissed, turning to Lori immediately and apologized to the girl. He pointed the barrel of the gun directly at him and apologized. "And yes, you will marry her," firmly said the old man. Lori laughed loudly, throwing his head up, but there was fear in his eyes, although the guy did his best not to show it. Maria slowly approached the old man, reading in his ear, he's not worth it." The chief did not answer her anything, only impatiently drove his shoulder in fear of her hand, and did not lower the gun. "Where are you? Are you out of your mind? Fuck you, you Marasmus." He spat under Nick's feet. I'm not marrying your chicken and fuck off. I'm all the way out of your nut house. He made a move to leave, but the stern voice stopped him again and apologized to her. And fuck you, shouted back the frightened Lori. Shoot, you weakling, shoot, and then my parents will do this to you. But Lori didn't get a chance to speak. Another shot rang out. Nick was aiming at the floor next to the bastard's legs, but accidentally hit one of his limbs. The downed young man howled in pain. Maria howled in terror. The cafe workers ran out of their hiding places. Nick slowly approached the guy lying on the floor. You apologize and marry her. He repeated stiffly. He looked around at his staff and tossed carelessly. Call an ambulance for this scumbag. The old man spat at Lori and disappeared through the door of his office, leaving everyone completely bewildered. Maria rushed after him. Nick, Maria ran into the office, falling to her knees in front of the old man. Thank you. Thank you for standing up for me. But what happens now? What's gonna happen? You'll go to jail, won't you? In tears, she screamed. The old man lifted the girl up, sitting her down on a table nearby. Come on. Don't cry, he said, stroking her head. Against this advice, Maria burst into tears with renewed vigor. She felt humiliated, destroyed, trampled into dust, wide patent shoes, scum, rich. Besides, she was also guilty. She had framed the only person who had treated her sympathetically, who had accepted her and given her a ticket to a normal life. Finally, Maria looked up at the old man with her eyes swollen with tears. Forgive me. Quietly, she stretched out. Forgive you. You need to get away immediately. You know he has very powerful parents. You must leave immediately, she said firmly. Calm down, it's not your fault, calmly replied the old man. And nothing terrible will happen to me, I assure you. He lifted himself up, leaving Maria sitting on the table, poured her a glass of water from the bolero he had in his office, and continued talking to Maria. I know his parents really well. These people are quite decent. Believe me, if they found out what happened, they would take your side. But if I do go to jail, well, that's my fate. I don't regret what I did, the old man concluded. They're in tears. Maria thought for a moment. She slowly drank the water and said firmly, I think I know what we should do. 3 weeks had passed since the horrifying incident, and still nothing was known about Loria. Thinking over everything that had happened, Maria caught herself an angry and even dangerous thought. She realized that she wished Lori were dead. Realizing this, she became seriously afraid for herself. To wish a man dead, how did I get to this point? She thought with horror, unable to banish these demonic thoughts from her head. Time passed, but so far no cure. Contrary to popular saying, but in this short time once naive good Maria became a completely different person. What had happened had made her older and wiser. Sometimes it seemed to her that she was like a phoenix bird, burned to the ground, and rose again from the ashes. One day she finally decided to act. Ave noticed that she would be late in the morning and went to the police station. The officer on duty greeted her blankly. He was sitting at a small desk with his head bent over some papers. Please have a seat. I am a junior sergeant of the Internal Service, Michael. What's your question? He raised his head, and Maria cried out in amazement. Mike, is it really you? And the young sergeant, as it turned out, had forgotten how to breathe. With widened eyes, he stared in amazement at his visitor. Maria, I can't believe my eyes. How beautiful you have become. Maria smiled weakly, involuntarily embarrassed, and averted her gaze before her sat her Mike. Her first and probably only true love. The last time they had seen each other was many years ago, the day when he was still a teenager leaving the walls of the orphanage. Since that day, she had often thought of him very often. You're an investigator now. Yes, such a young guy smiled broadly. Well, almost. I'm still an assistant. I'm a fast learner. My superiors praise me. They say I'm gonna do great. He took a breath and stopped talking. What about you? I'm a fool to be crucified. Something happened to you, didn't it? Come on, tell me. By the end of her mournful tale, he was shouting in a rage that didn't hide his anger. I'll kill that asshole. Maria waved her head. No, Calm down, please. He's not worth it." Eventually, after consulting with senior colleagues, they prepared a statement accusing him of fraud and rape. "Maria," Michael gently touched her arm. "I realize you're having a hard time right now, but maybe we can go out with you somewhere." But Maria pulled her hand, and tears came to her eyes again. "No, I can't yet. I'm sorry." Lori limped out of the cab. Maria had called him a couple of hours ago and asked for an urgent meeting, without giving the exact reasons. The guy was at first taken aback by such impudence, but after thinking about it, he decided to meet. He immediately called his friends, inviting them to go together to mock this bearded beard. He cheered them up, but most of the warm company of majors did not want to get involved in the story again. In the end, only 2 people wanted to go with Lori: his girlfriend Helen and a buddy named Jacob. Helen helped the guy out of the car, holding him by the elbow. His leg was still in a cast. Jacob was shy in the bright sun, standing already near the door of the cafe. Lori hesitated, looking at his girlfriend. "Why do you forgive me everything?" He mentally asked this question to himself when the door to the cafe opened. Lori prepared to shout some nasty remark about his fictitious wife, but froze in place in the hall in the company of Maria and that fictitious old man who had almost shot him, sat his own parents. "There you are," the boy's mother looked at him menacingly. "Sit down." She pointed him to the seat beside her like a schoolboy in a Skoda. Lori slowly lowered himself into the seats offered to him. He turned around. Helen and Jacob were already gone. He swallowed hard, realizing that his parents would not approve of his behavior. Maria was the first to speak up. "Look," she nonchalantly slid Lori a piece of paper. He took a quick look at the paperwork and was stunned. It was a summons to the police, with a copy of Maria's statement attached. He looked at his parents. "It's not my fault. None of this is true," shouted he, excusing himself. "Shut your mouth," bellowed the boy's father, hitherto silent lice. "Listen to what she has to say." Maria firmly pronounced, "If you don't fulfill what I demand, I won't take back my application. You'll go to jail for fraud and rape." She paused for a long moment. "I hope you're aware of how rapists are treated in prison. Parents are not going to help you, as you already realize." The girl looked at the elderly couple. They nodded synchronously. Maria continued, "But you have one more option. I can take back my application, but only on condition that you marry me. I'm expecting a child from you." She looked at everyone present and summarized the choice for you. Lori was sullenly silent. The news that he would soon be a father did not add to his enthusiasm. Finally, he looked up. "Ah, so you're all in cahoots." "I see. Then I'll sue you." He put his foot forward. "Do you think attempted murder with a firearm carries the same sentence?" He looked menacingly at Molchanov Nick, but he did not answer him with anything but a contemptuous look. Maria rose from the table and threw Lori carelessly. "Don't think." She left the room without waiting for him to respond, knowing full well that Lori had been out of options a couple days ago. Thanks to Nick, she had managed to contact Lori's parents and told him about their son's behavior. The couple was shocked to hear what they had heard. After learning about the girl's pregnancy, they began to talk her into a real marriage. Maria agreed. She did not want her child to grow up fatherless. Lori's parents promised to deal with their own offspring. When they found out Nick had shot their son, they weren't even particularly angry. After all, Lori had no excuse for what he'd done. 4 years passed. Maria carried and gave birth to a healthy and strong boy. Even before the birth of his son, Lori gave in and married Maria. Now, of course, there was no real celebration, and the young people quietly signed, trying not to look each other in the eyes. Life went on as usual. Maria and her son moved into a new, large, and comfortable apartment, which Lori's parents had bought for them. Lori himself, as you can well understand, was not going to live in it, and Maria did not want to live with him under the same roof. At first, Lori was in a constant frenzy. He didn't want to see this girl who was twisting him around her finger, let alone her bastard. And Maria, being already a married woman and not needing anything thanks to the support of her own, her mother-in-law still did not give up her favorite job. After experiencing all the events described above, the young woman has only grown stronger. She finally put all those who had once made fun of her in their place. Now, no one dared to cross her path. After 4 months on maternity leave and leaving her young son in the care of a nanny, Maria didn't hesitate to fire Molly. She was tired of putting up with the antics of her former partner. And the chief now, they have become really related people. And even Maria named her son after her beautiful boss, Nick. The kid, a little older, began to call the old man grandfather, which he was delighted. Time passed, and Maria could not leave the thought of her Mike. She every day remembered their long-ago meeting, regretting that she refused the guy on a date. And she kept thinking, maybe I should have married Lori for nothing. I could never be happy with him. These thoughts didn't make the woman happy, but she was afraid to change anything. After all, he was the father of her child, and his parents had done the most decent thing for her. Family ties were more important than anything to her, having grown up without relatives. Or was it? Lori was slowly getting used to his new life. His notorious freedom was still not threatened by anything but a stamp in his passport. But after a few years of dissolute life, he suddenly realized that he terribly wants to see his son. Maria did not deny him this desire. I remember that he is the boy's own father, and the child is not guilty of anything. To everyone's surprise, unlucky. Both father and little son quickly found common ground. "Mommy, my daddy is so good, delighted," said Nick. "He can grunt like a real pig." Maria didn't know whether to laugh or cry at such a message from her son. Getting older over the years, Lori had actually rethought a lot of things. One crisp evening, he decided to do something important. "Maria, hi, could you meet me?" "What is it?" "There's no way we can discuss this over the phone," Maria asked, putting Nick's things in a neat stack. "No. Can I come to your place?" "All right," she shrugged. "Come over, just don't be late. Nick's in bed by 9. Opening the door. An hour after this conversation, she was stunned. Behind the huge bouquet, not even Lori's face was visible, saying nothing. He stepped inside, knelt down on the bottom of her knee, and handed her a small red box. "What's this for Lori?" The woman, perplexed, looked at her fictitious spouse. "Are you up to your old tricks again?" "Maria, no. What are you?" "It's been so many years. I've changed. Don't you see? I've been thinking a lot, and I finally realized I really love you. All I want is to live together with you and our son." He looked into her eyes, hoping to see tears of joy there. But Maria's face expressed absolutely nothing. Maria looked calmly at her so-called husband. He was kneeling before her again. This time so pathetic, exactly pathetic. She felt nothing but pity for him. "You are hopelessly too late for that, my dear." She smiled at last, with only her lips. "It seems that now you and I are at last even." "Maria." He tried to grab her hand, but she yanked it away sharply. "No, Lori, you can see Nick whenever you want." "What about me? I don't love you anymore. I don't think I've ever really loved you. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." A leisurely gait. A young, beautiful, self-confident woman walked along the embankment, reaching the very bench where she and the girls used to sit many years ago. She smiled, went to the ice cream stand, bought herself the biggest cone, and with a satisfied sigh, sat down and looked at the bay. Now she knew for sure that there was not and had never been a place in her heart for Lori ever. Her big loving heart belonged to only 3 living beings in this vast world: her little son, her named Father Nick, and the old fat cat. But maybe there's room in it for someone else. Who knows? In the distance, a male figure gradually emerged from the fog. It drew closer, taking on a familiar shape, and finally became fully embodied. "Maria, hello. How nice to see you. How are you? What's new with you?" he asked. He sits down next to me. "Hello, Mike. I called you to tell you that I divorced my husband yesterday." Maria smiled. "And if your heart's still not in the right place, maybe we could go out." "Definitely go out." He smiled happily. A year and a half later, the same embankment again received these two, but already in the company of a pretty pink wheelchair and a completely gray-haired, but still very cheerful and confident man. The whole company was leisurely walking along the bay. every now and then peeking into the cute transportation and succussing with its passenger. Reaching a kiosk with ice cream, they met a tall, handsome man who brought a boy of about 7 years old and handed him to them from hand to hand. The happy family slowly left, and the boy after some time turned around and waved to the man, and he answered him with a smile, waved back happily, and then did not leave, but stood in one place near the ice cream stand and looked after them for a long time.